Beginnings. If you reach for a star, you might not get one. But you won't come up with a handful of mud either. Leo Burnett. Chapter 1. Introduction. This book grew out of my blog, www.jlcollinsnh.com www.jlcollinsnh.com. The blog, in turn, grew out of a series of letters I had begun to write to my then teenage daughter. These letters concerned various things, mostly about money and investing. She was not yet quite ready to hear. Since money is the single most powerful tool we have for navigating this complex world we've created, understanding it is critical. If you choose to master it, money becomes a wonderful servant. If you don't, it will surely master you. But Dad, my little girl once said to me, I know money is important. I just don't want to spend my life thinking about it. For me this was eye-opening. I love this stuff. But most people have better things to do with their precious time than think about money. They have bridges to build, diseases to cure, treaties to negotiate, mountains to climb, technologies to create, children to teach, businesses to open and build. Unfortunately, this benign neglect of things financial leaves you open to the charlatans of the financial world. The people who make investing endlessly complex, because if it can be made complex it becomes more profitable for them, more expensive for us, and we are forced into their waiting arms. Here's an important truth: complex investments exist only to profit those who create and sell them. Further, not only are they more costly to the investor, they are less effective. Here are a few key guidelines to consider. Spend less than you earn, invest the surplus, avoid debt. Do simply this and you'll wind up rich. Not just in money. Carrying debt is as appealing as being covered with leeches and has much the same effect. Take out your sharpest knife and start scraping the little bloodsuckers off. If your lifestyle matches, or God forbid exceeds, your income, you are no more than a gilded slave. Avoid fiscally irresponsible people. Never marry one or otherwise give him or her access to your money. Avoid investment advisors. Too many have only their own interests at heart. By the time you know enough to pick a good one, you know enough to handle your finances yourself. It's your money and no one will care for it better than you. You own the things you own and they in turn own you. Money can buy many things, but nothing more valuable than your freedom. Life choices are not always about the money, but you should always be clear about the financial impact of the choices you make. Sound investing is not complicated. Save a portion of every dollar you earn or that otherwise comes your way. The greater the percent of your income you save and invest, the sooner you'll have FU money. Try saving and investing 50% of your income. With no debt, this is perfectly doable. The beauty of a high savings rate is twofold: you learn to live on less even as you have more to invest. The stock market is a powerful wealth-building tool and you should be investing in it. But realize the market and the value of your shares will sometimes drop dramatically. This is absolutely normal and to be expected. When it happens, ignore the drops and buy more shares. This will be much, much harder than you think. People all around you will panic. The news media will be screaming sell, sell, sell. Nobody can predict when these drops will happen, even though the media is filled with those who claim they can. They are delusional, trying to sell you something or both. Ignore them. When you can live on 4% of your investments per year, you are financially independent. What is so simple and clear now I personally had to learn the hard way, and it took decades. Those initial letters to my daughter, then www.jlcollinsnh.com www.jlcollinsnh.com and now this book are all my efforts to share with her what works, where the minefields lie and how simple it all can and should be. My hope is that with it her path will be smoother, her missteps fewer and her own financial freedom will come sooner and with fewer tears. Now that you've picked up this book, my hope is the same for you. We'll discuss all those bullet points above and more. So let's get started together. We'll begin with a parable. Chapter 2. A parable, the monk and the minister. Two close boyhood friends grow up and go their separate ways. One becomes a humble monk, the other a rich and powerful minister to the king. Years later they meet. As they catch up, the portly minister, in his fine robes, takes pity on the thin and shabby monk. Seeking to help, he says, "You know, if you could learn to cater to the king, you wouldn't have to live on rice and beans." To which the monk replies, "If you could learn to live on rice and beans, you wouldn't have to cater to the king." Most all of us fall somewhere between the two. As for me, it is better to be closer to the monk. Chapter 3. My story, it has never been about retirement. For me, the pursuit of financial independence has never been about retirement. I like working and I've enjoyed my career. It's been about having options. It's been about being able to say no. It's been about having FU money and the freedom it provides. I started working when I was 13, even earlier if you count selling fleisswaters door to door and collecting pop bottles from the side of the road for the deposits. For the most part, I've enjoyed work and I've always loved being paid. From the beginning, I was a natural saver. Watching my money grow was intoxicating. I've never been sure how this started. It might be hardwired into my genes. It might be my mother seducing me with the image of the red convertible I'd be able to buy when I turned 16. But that was not to be. My father's health failed before that birthday and shortly thereafter so did his business. My savings went to pay for college and I learned it is a fiscally insecure world. Convertibles came later. To this day it stuns me to read about some middle-aged guy laid off from his job of 20 years and almost instantly broke. How does anyone let that happen? It is the result of failing to master money. Long before I heard the term, I knew I wanted FU money. If memory serves, the phrase originates in James Clavell's novel Noble House, and from the moment I read it, my goal had a tangible form and an unforgettable name. In the novel, a young woman is on a quest to secure her own FU money. By this, she means enough money to be completely free of the demands of others and able to do exactly what she wants with her life and time. She's after 10 million, far more than it takes to reach simple financial independence. At least for me. It helps to have a bit of the monk inside. The other thing I quickly figured out is that financial independence is at least as much about being able to live modestly as it is about cash, as our opening parable describes. Unlike in the novel, for me enough FU money isn't necessarily enough to live on for the rest of your life. Sometimes it's only just enough to step to the side for a while. I first had mine at age 25 when I'd managed to save the princely sum of $5,000, something achieved after working 2 years at $10,000 per year. It was my first professional job and it had taken me 2 long post college years supporting myself doing minimum wage grunt work to find it. But I wanted to travel. I wanted to spend a few months bumming around Europe. I went to my boss and asked for 4 months of unpaid leave. Such a thing was unheard of in those days. He said, no. Back then I had no idea that working relationships were negotiable. You asked. Your employer decided and answered. Done. I went home and spent a week or so thinking about it. In the end, as much as I liked the job and as tough as I assumed finding another would be, I resigned. I wanted to go to Europe. Then a funny thing happened. My boss said, don't do anything rash. Let me talk to the owner. When the dust settled, we agreed on a 6-week leave which I spent riding my bicycle around Ireland and Wales. While I might not have initially realized such things could be negotiated, I learned quickly enough. I also asked for and received a month of annual vacation going forward. That got me to Greece the following year. My eyes were opened. FU money not only paid for the trip, it bought me room to negotiate. I'd never be a slave again. Since then, I've quit jobs 4 more times and have been kicked to the curb once. I've sat on the sidelines for as little as 3 months and for as long as 5 years. I've done it to change careers, to focus on buying a business, to travel and, the time it wasn't my call, with no plan at all. I did it most recently in 2011 and the intention this time is to remain retired. But who knows? I do like getting paid. My daughter was born during one of these, unpaid leaves. These things happen when you have time on your hands. Now an adult, she has grown up with anything from dad working 18-hour days and constantly away from home, to dad sleeping late and lounging around. But she always knew that I was doing, for the most part, exactly what I wanted to do at the time. I like to think that these experiences taught her the value of having money and the joy of work when you aren't effectively a slave to it. When she was about 2, her mom went back to school. This was during my business buying phase and I had lots of free time. While mom was at the university in the evenings, my daughter and I spent endless hours watching The Lion King over and over. And over. I've probably seen that movie more times than all other movies combined. We still laugh remembering the teacup towers and Lincoln log cabins we built. These hours were the foundation of the relationship we've grown to cherish. Even though I didn't have a paycheck coming in at the time, we also decided my wife should quit her job to become a stay-at-home mom. While she liked the idea, this was a very tough call for her. Like me, she'd been working since childhood and loved it. She felt that without a job, she wouldn't be contributing. We have FU money, I said. We don't care about fancy cars or a bigger house. If you kept working, what could we possibly buy with the money that would have more value than you being home with our daughter? Put in those terms, the choice was easy. She quit. It was far and away the best purchase we ever made. Of course, this also meant we had no working income. However, for the 3 years we both weren't working, our net worth actually grew. It was the first time we fully realized we had moved beyond just having FU money. We had become financially independent. As for me, I failed in finding a business to buy, though the search morphed into consulting work and a couple of years into that a client hired me for more money than I'd been making at the job I'd left years earlier. Such is the price of failure in the US. When we moved to New Hampshire, my wife volunteered in our daughter's grammar school library. Their hours, of course, matched perfectly. After a couple of years the school offered her a paid gig. It wasn't the corporate job she'd been used to, but it was also stress-free and fun. She's never looked back. For the most part, over the 34 years we've been married, at least one of us has been working. That handily solved the tough problem of health insurance. During the early 1990s, when we had an overlapping employer-less few years, we bought a high-deductible catastrophic health plan. It is too long ago to remember the details and they likely wouldn't apply today anyway. But that's what we'll seek out if and when my wife decides to hang it up before we hit 65 and Medicare. For now, she loves working with the kids at her school and the time off it allows her for our traveling. As I'll detail later in the book, and as its title implies, our investments are the soul of simplicity. You'll also see I'm not a fan of the multiple income stream school of investing. Simple is, in my book, pun intended, better. So we have no cattle, gold, annuities, royalties and the like. When I quit work in 2011 and we fully settled into our financial independence, we still had a couple of leftover investments from earlier times. These represented the last remnants of the many investing mistakes I've made over the years. Now in retirement, we've burned those up first as we needed the cash. They mostly revolved around the idea that I could pick investments that would outperform the basic stock index. It took me far too long to accept just how impossibly difficult a task that is. 3 things saved us. Our unwavering 50% savings rate. Avoiding debt. We've never even had a car payment. Finally embracing the indexing lessons Jack Bogle, the founder of the Vanguard Group and the inventor of index funds, perfected 40 years ago. Looking back, what is striking to me is how many mistakes I've made along the way. Yet those three simple things got us to where we wanted to be. That should be encouraging to anyone out there who has also made poor choices along the way and who is ready to change. When my journey began, I knew no one else following such a path. I had no idea where it would or could lead. I had no one to tell me stock picking was a sucker's game or that swinging for the fences isn't needed to reach financial independence. That last point alone would have saved me the $50,000 of my money Mariah International, a gold mining penny stock, burned through while failing to make me rich. So now I'm, again, retired and it feels great. I love not having to keep regular hours. I can stay up till 4 a.m. and sleep till noon. Or I can get up at 4:30 and watch the sun rise. I can ride my motorbike any time the weather or my pals beckon. I can hang around New Hampshire or disappear for months at a time to South America. I post on my blog when the spirit moves me and I might even get another book or two written. Or I can just sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and read the books others have written. One of my very few regrets is that I spent far too much time worrying about how things might work out. It's a huge waste, but it is a bit hardwired into me. Don't do it. The older I get, the more I hold each day precious. I've become steadily more relentless in purging from my life things, activities, and people who no longer add value while seeking out and adding those that do. It's a big, beautiful world out there. Money is a small part of it. But money buys you the freedom, resources, and time to explore it on your own terms. Retired or not. Enjoy your journey. But first, please be sure to carefully read the important notes that follow. Chapter 4. Important Notes. Note number 1, Things change. At some points in this book, I've cited various laws and regulations, and used specific numbers for things like the expense ratios of mutual funds, tax brackets, limits on contributions to investment accounts and the like. While these were all accurate at the time of writing, like many things in this world, they are subject to change. Indeed, frequently during the various rewrites of the manuscript I found myself having to update them. By the time you read this book, some will surely be out of date. As they are used primarily to illustrate the broader concepts I am presenting, this shouldn't matter much. However, if you find for your situation or even just for your own curiosity it does, by all means take the time to look up the most current rules and numbers for yourself. Note number 2, on the projections and calculators used in this book. In chapters 3, 6, 13, 19, 22 and 23 you will find various what-if scenarios. In creating these, I had first to select a given calculator and then the parameters to enter. By definition, this means these scenarios are only for the purpose of making or demonstrating a point. While the data and input are accurate, the results are not, and cannot be, a prediction of what the future will hold. In each case, the URL for the calculator used is provided along with the settings chosen. For example, 1. http://dqidj.net/sp-500-return-calculator/http://return-calculator use dividends reinvested/ignore inflation. 2. http://dqidj.net/sp-500-dividend-reinvestment-and-periodic investment calculator/http://dqidj.net/sp-500-dividend-reinvestment and periodic investment calculator/click show advanced and check ignore taxes and ignore fees. 3. http://www.calculator.net/investment-calculator.html http://www.calculator.net/investment-calculator.html. Click End Amount tab. In running these scenarios, I chose to select dividends reinvested because this is typically what investors do, and should do, while investing to build their wealth. To ignore inflation, too unpredictable, taxes, too variable between individuals, and fees, also variable, and if you choose the index funds I recommend, minimal. If you want to see what the numbers look like including any of these variables, I encourage you to visit the calculators and run the numbers with your own specifications. Most often in running these scenarios, the period of time I've chosen has been January 1975 to January 2015, for these reasons. It is a nice, solid 40-year period and this book advocates investing for the long term. 1975 is the year Jack Bogle launched the world's first index fund and this book advocates investing in index funds. 1975 happens to be the year I started investing, not that this matters to you. As it happens, from January 1975 to January 2015, using the parameters I chose above, the market returned an average of 11.9% per year. As you'll learn reading this book, the actual returns for any given year were all over the place. But when the dust settled, over that 40-year period, the average was 11.9%. That is a breathtaking number. Already I can hear the naysayers howling. From January 2000, January 2009 the market wasn't returning anywhere near 11.9%. True enough. Returns then were an ugly -3.8% with dividends reinvested. But that time frame encompassed one of the very worst investment periods of the last 100 years. During one of the best, January 1982 to January 2000, returns blew past 11.9%, averaging around 18.5% per year. More recently, since January 2009 until January 2015 the return has been 17.7% per year. The fact is, in any given year, it is exceedingly rare that the market will deliver any specific return. Moreover, the average market return will vary dramatically depending on exactly what period you choose to measure. So, this left me with a bit of a dilemma. The real, actual return for that 40-year period was 11.9%. But, and let me be absolutely clear about this, in no way should it be used as an expected return going forward. I am not for a moment suggesting that you can count on 11.9% annual returns in planning for your future. The idea that someone might think I am gave me serious pause. So I considered using a different time span. But given the variables above, that would only project a different percentage equally unlikely to hold going forward. Using the same 40-year span but with different parameters was an option. Those results look like this. Without reinvesting dividends, 8.7% without reinvesting dividends plus inflation, 4.7% reinvesting dividends plus inflation, 7.8%. But for the reasons mentioned above these seemed even less useful, even if less shocking. I briefly considered just using a random percentage that seemed reasonable, say 8%. Indeed, as you'll see, I do use 8% in a couple of illustrations. It is commonly said the market returns between 8 to 12% annually, and for those cases using the lower end of that range seemed most reasonable. But still that's just pulling a number out of the air, and who is to say what's reasonable? In the end, as you'll see, I mostly went with the breathtaking 11.9%. As they say, it is what it is. But, and again, I am not for a moment suggesting that you can count on 11.9% annual returns in planning for your future. We are only doing a bit of what-if analysis here to explore the possibilities. If 11.9% strikes you as too high, or too modest, you can run the numbers using the percentage or time period that seems most reasonable to you. Whatever you choose, it won't be what happens each year even if it turns out to be reasonably correct in measuring the decades. Nobody can predict the future precisely, and that's something to remember any time you're looking at exercises such as these. Part 1. Orientation. The tide is high but I'm holding on. Blondie. Chapter 1. Debt, the unacceptable burden. A couple of years after I was out of college, I got my first credit card. They were tougher to come by in those days. Not like now when my unemployed pet poodle has his own line of credit. The first month I racked up about $300 or so. When the bill came, there was each charge listed by vendor, with the total at the bottom. In the upper right-hand corner there was a box with a dollar sign in it and a blank space beside it. Under this in bold letters it read, minimum payment due, $10. I could hardly believe my eyes. I get to buy $300 worth of stuff and they only require me to pay them back $10 a month. And I can still buy more. Wow! This is awesome. But still, in the back of my mind I could hear my father's voice, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. Not, it could be, or, it might be. It is. Fortunately, my older sister was sitting nearby. She pointed out the fine print. The part about them planning to charge me 18% interest on the $290. They were hoping I'd let ride. What? Did these people think I was stupid? As a matter of fact they did. It was nothing personal. They think the same of all of us. And unfortunately, all too frequently they're not wrong. Pause for a moment and take a look at the people around you, literally and figuratively. What you'll often see, if you scratch the surface just a bit, is an unquestioning acceptance of the single most dangerous obstacle to building wealth, debt. For marketers, it is a powerful tool. It allows them to sell their products and services far more easily, and for far more money, than if it didn't exist. Do you think the average cost of a new car would be pushing $32,000 without easy financing? Or that a college education would cost over $100,000 if it were not for readily available student loans? Think again. Not surprisingly, debt has been promoted as, and largely embraced as, a perfectly normal part of life. Indeed, it is hard to argue that it has not become normal. As I write, here in the US Americans carry a total debt burden of $12 trillion. $8 trillion in home mortgages. $1 trillion in student loans. $3 trillion in other consumer loans such as credit card debt and auto loans. By the time you read this, these numbers will undoubtedly be higher. And most disturbingly, almost no one you know will see this as a problem. In fact, most will see it as their ticket into the good life. But let's be clear. This book is about guiding you towards financial independence. It is about buying your financial freedom. It is about helping you become wealthy and putting you in control of your financial destiny. Look around at those people again. Most will never achieve this, and their acceptance of debt is the single biggest reason why. If you intend to achieve financial freedom, you are going to have to think differently. It starts by recognizing that debt should not be considered normal. It should be recognized as the vicious, pernicious destroyer of wealth-building potential it truly is. It has no place in your financial life. The idea that many, indeed most, people seem to happily bury themselves in debt is so beyond my understanding it is hard to imagine. How, let alone why, the downsides would need be explained. But here are a few. Your lifestyle is diminished. Set aside any aspirations to financial freedom. Even if your goal is living the maximum consumer lifestyle, the more debt you carry the more of your income is devoured by interest payments. A sometimes huge portion of your income has already been spent. You are enslaved to whatever source of income you have. Your debt needs to be serviced. Your practical ability to make choices congruent with your values and long-term goals is seriously constrained. Your stress levels build. It feels as if you are being buried alive. The emotional and psychological effects of being saddled with debt are real and dangerous. You endure the same type of negative emotions experienced by any addict: shame, guilt, loneliness, and above all, helplessness. The fact that it's a prison of your own making makes it all the more difficult. Your options can become so narrowed and your stress levels so high, you risk turning to self-destructive patterns that only reinforce the dependence on spending. Drinking perhaps, or smoking. Or, ironically, shopping and still more spending. It's a dangerous, self-perpetuating cycle. Your debt tends to focus your attention on the past, present and future exclusively in the worst possible way. You become fixated on your past mistakes, your present pain and the disaster looming ahead. Your brain tends to shut down on the subject with the vague hope it will all resolve itself in some magical way and in the magical time of later. Living with debt becomes hardwired in your financial attitudes, habits and values. Okay, but what do I do about the debt I have? While the mantra here is, avoid debt at all costs, if you already have it, it is worth considering if paying it off ahead of schedule is the best use of your capital. In today's environment, here's my rough guideline: if your interest rate is less than 3%, pay it off slowly and route the money to your investments instead. Between 3 to 5%, do whatever feels most comfortable, either put the money to debt payment or investments. More than 5%, pay it off ASAP. But this is just looking at the numbers. There is a lot to be said for focusing on just getting it out of your life and moving on. Especially if keeping your debt under control has been a problem for you. Okay, I'm gonna pay it off. What now? Countless articles and books have been written about ridding yourself of debt. If after reading this chapter you feel you need more guidance and help, by all means embrace them. But be careful not to let the pursuit of the methods get in the way of the doing. The truth is, there is no easy way. But it is pretty simple. Here's what I'd do. Make a list of all your debts. Eliminate all non-essential spending, and I mean all of it. Those routine $5 coffees, $20 dinners and $12 cocktails add up. This is what will free up the money you need to pour on the debt flames that are burning up your life. The more you pour, the sooner you stop burning. Rank your debts by interest rate. Pay the minimum required on all your debts and then focus the rest of your available money on the one with the highest interest rate first. Once you've blown that one away, move on to the second highest and right on down the list. Once you're done, send me a note and let me know. I'll be raising my glass in a kudos salute to you. Here's what I would not do. I would not pay a service to help. This only adds to your cost, and such credit counseling services have no magic formulas or techniques to make this less painful. You, and only you, can do the work. I would not worry about trying to consolidate your loans into one place, not even for a lower interest rate. You are going to pay these puppies off fast and hard. Once they're gone, your interest rate will be 0. That's your goal, not merely taking your rate from 18% to 12%. Focus your time and attention there, rather than on exploring clever strategies. I would not pay off the smaller loans first for the psychological boost. I know this is a key part of at least one popular strategy, and if it makes you more likely to stay the course, so be it. But as you'll learn reading further in this book, I'm not a fan of such crutches. Better to adapt yourself and your attitudes to the numbers than to adapt the strategies to your psychological comfort levels. In short, nothing fancy. Just do the work and get it done. This is not going to be easy. Simple, yes. Easy, no. It will require you to rather dramatically adjust your lifestyle and spending to free up the money you need to direct toward your debt. It will require serious discipline to stay the course over the months, maybe years, it will take to eliminate your debt. But here's the good news, and it really is awesomely good. Once you've ingrained that lower spending lifestyle and made diverting the excess cash to your debt your path, you will have also created exactly the platform required to begin building your financial independence. Once the debt is gone, you need only shift the money to investments. Where once you had the satisfaction of watching your debt diminish, you'll now have the joy of watching your wealth build. Waste no time. Debt is a crisis that needs immediate attention. If you are currently in debt, paying it off is your top priority. Nothing else is more important. Look again at those people around you. For most, debt is simply a part of life. But it doesn't have to be for you. You weren't born to be a slave. A few cautionary words on good debt. Occasionally you will hear the term good debt. Be very cautious when you do. Let's briefly look at the three most common types. Business loans. Some, but not all, businesses routinely borrow money for any number of reasons, acquiring assets, financing inventory, and expansion to name a few. Used wisely, such debt can move a business forward and provide greater returns. But debt is always a dangerous tool, and the history of commerce is littered with failed companies ruined by the debt they took on. Astutely dealing with such debt is beyond the scope of this book, other than to say those who use it successfully do so with great care. Mortgage loans. Taking on a mortgage to buy a house is the classic definition of good debt. But don't be so sure. The easy availability of mortgage loans tempts far too many into buying houses they don't need or that are far more expensive than prudent. Shamefully, this overspending is often encouraged by real estate agents and mortgage brokers. If your goal is financial independence, it is also to hold as little debt as possible. This means you'll seek the least house to meet your needs rather than the most house you can technically afford. Remember, the more house you buy, the greater its cost. Not just in higher mortgage payments, but also in higher real estate taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance and repairs, landscaping, remodeling, furnishing and opportunity costs on all the money tied up as you build equity. To name a few. More house also means more stuff to maintain and fill it. The more and greater things you allow in your life, the more of your time, money and life energy they demand. Houses are an expensive indulgence, not an investment. That's okay if and when the time for such an indulgence comes. I've owned them myself. But don't let yourself be blinded by the idea that owning one is necessary, always financially sound and automatically justifies taking on this good debt. Student loans. When I was in college at the University of Illinois from 1968 to 72, the total annual cost was $1,200. This $1,200 covered everything: tuition, books, rent, food and even a little entertainment. Each 12-week summer I worked taking down diseased elm trees. I was paid $20 a day over a 6-day week. I saved $100 a week and by fall had the $1,200 needed for the school year. Of course, I lived in one room of a dilapidated old house that should have been condemned. White rice and ketchup were served as dinner 2 or 3 times a week. Fast forward to 2010 to 14, my daughter's college years. The all-in yearly cost averaged $40,000 at the University of Rhode Island, also a state school. New York University, her other option, would have run $60,000 per year. As a former colleague of mine once said, that's like buying a new BMW, driving it for a year and throwing it away. Then buying another. For 4 consecutive years. Inflation certainly played a role. Using the CPI, Consumer Price Index. What cost $1 in 1970 took $6.19 to buy in 2014. A 6-fold increase. In the same time period, a 4-year state school college education went from $4,800 to $160,000. A 33-fold increase. Make no mistake, easily obtained student loans have flooded the system with money. Universities have been and continue on a building boom. Fancier prices require fancier settings. The average salary of a university president in 1970 was $25-30,000. Today it averages around $500,000 and can run into the millions. Not only has this driven up the cost of everything college-related, it has effectively eliminated the option of living cheaply. That ramshackle house I lived in, torn down to make way for fancy new dorms. Eat in on rice and ketchup. No worries, my friends did the same. It was a source of pride. Today, it would be a source of embarrassment as all your student loan-funded pals go out for sushi. Moreover, one of the more unfortunate results of spiraling college costs and debt is the way it has warped the very concept of higher education. Rather than the pursuit of learning and culture, it has become the pursuit of job training in an effort to secure employment that will justify the astounding cost and debt incurred. Even successfully applied, this shackles young people to jobs long after the appeal has faded. Youth should be spent exploring, building and expanding one's horizons, not grinding away in chains. Here's the real kicker: unlike other kinds of debt, as truly awful as they are, you can never walk away from your student loans. They survive bankruptcy. They will follow you to your grave. Your wages, and even Social Security, can be garnished to pay them. No wonder banks are falling all over themselves to issue this debt. I am a firm believer in personal responsibility and that debts freely taken on should be faithfully repaid. But the ethics of encouraging 17 and 18-year-olds, who likely have little financial savvy, to almost automatically accept this burden give me serious pause. We are creating a generation of indentured servants. It's hard to see the ethics or benefits in that. Chapter 2. Why you need FU money. Shortly after September 11th, my company kicked me to the curb. 6 months earlier our division president had taken me to a congratulatory lunch for a record-breaking year. We were growing explosively and embarrassingly profitable. Over a bottle of fine wine we discussed my very bright future. It was the best job I've ever had. We had a great team, great leadership, great fun, and I made great money. I had just cashed a bonus check for more than I had ever made in a single year before. A year later, my little girl and I were sitting on the couch watching a news broadcast. The concerned news crew was filming people standing in a Depression-era style bread line. They were, the reporter said, the newly poor suffering from job loss in the dismal economy. I was still unemployed and licking my wounds. "Daddy," said my then 8-year-old, "are we poor?" She was gravely concerned. "No," I said, "we're just fine." "But you don't have a job," she said. She was thinking, I'm sure, just like those poor jobless souls on the TV. Who even thought she knew what a job was? "That's no problem, honey. We have money that's working for us instead." That's what I said, but what I was thinking was, this was exactly why I had worked so hard to be sure I had FU money. In fact, I'd been working on it long before I heard the term. I may not have known at first what it was called, but I knew what it was and why it was important. There are many things money can buy, but the most valuable of all is freedom. Freedom to do what you want and to work for whom you respect. Those who live paycheck to paycheck are slaves. Those who carry debt are slaves with even stouter shackles. Don't think for a moment that their masters aren't aware of it. As already described, I first accumulated the modest amount of FU money I needed to negotiate extra vacation time 2 years into my first professional job. By 1989 the amount and the freedom it provided had grown substantially. Not enough to retire, perhaps, but easily enough to say FU if needed. The timing was fortunate. I wanted to take some time off to pursue business acquisitions. When one morning I found myself and my boss in the office hallway screaming at each other, it occurred to me perhaps the time had come. I may not have owned a Mercedes, but I owned my freedom. Freedom to choose when to leave a job and freedom from worry when the choice wasn't mine. Good thing. It turned out I was unemployed for 3 full years after 9/11. I'm really lousy at job hunting. Chapter 3. Can everyone really retire a millionaire? I wonder if it would actually be possible for every single person to retire a millionaire. That very provocative question was posed on my blog a few years back. It's been rattling around in my brain ever since. The short answer is a qualified yes, it is possible for every middle-class wage earner to retire a millionaire. Though it's never going to happen. And that's not because the numbers don't work. The numbers tell us that, compounded over time, it actually takes very little money invested to grow to $1 million. Over the 40 years from January 1975 to January 2015, the market has averaged an annual return of 11.9% with dividends reinvested, 8.7% if you spent your dividends along the way. 0.1 at that rate, just $12,000 invested in the S&P 500 stocks in 1975 would be worth over a cool million. $1,077,485 today. 2 don't have $12,000 lying around. That's okay. If you started in January 1975 and invested $130 per month, $1,560 a year, by January 2015 you would have had $985,102.20, not quite a million, but not a handful of mud either. Want nothing less than the full million? Kicking it up an extra $20 to $150 per month, or $1,800 a year, would have gotten you to $1,136,656.20, your million plus a new Tesla and Corvette. If you think about it, this is pretty amazing considering all the financial turmoil of the past 40 years. However, it's important to know that compounding takes time, so it helps to start young. Of course, $1 million is a very arbitrary goal. Perhaps the better question is, can everybody achieve financial independence? On blogs like www.earlyretirementextreme.com, www.earlyretirementextreme.com, and www.mrmoneymustache.com, www.mrmoneymustache.com, you'll find countless stories of people with modest incomes who, by way of frugal living and dedicated savings, get there in a remarkably short time. For example, if you can live on $7,000 per year, as the author of Early Retirement Extreme contentedly does, $175,000 gets it done, figuring an annual withdrawal rate of 4%. See Chapter 29. On the other hand, I remember having lunch with a friend of mine in 1995 shortly before Christmas. He'd just gotten his annual bonus, $800,000. He spent the lunch complaining that it simply wasn't possible to make ends meet with just a lousy $800,000 year-end bonus. Somewhat stunningly, listening to him list his expenses, he was right. He was burning through more than $175,000 every 3 months. Financial independence was a distant dream for him. Money is a very relative thing. Right now I have roughly $100 in my wallet. For some, very wealthy, people out there, $10,000 has less relative value to their net worth. For, even wealthier, others, it's $100,000. For still others, the vast number of very poor in the world, $100 might be more than they'll see in an entire year. Being independently wealthy is every bit as much about limiting needs as it is about how much money you have. It has less to do with how much you earn. High-income earners often go broke while low-income earners get there, than what you value. Money can buy many things, none of which is more important than your financial independence. Here's the simple formula. Spend less than you earn, invest the surplus, avoid debt. As we discussed in the introduction, do only this and you'll wind up rich. Not just in money. But if your lifestyle matches or exceeds your income, you forfeit your hopes of financial independence. Let's consider an example. Suppose you make $25,000 per year and you decide you want to be financially independent. Using some of the lifestyle tips from the blogs above, you'd want to organize your life in such a fashion as to live on $12,500 annually. Two important things would immediately happen. You'd have reduced your needs and created a source of cash with which to invest. Now let's use our calculators to play with some scenarios. Assuming you'll be financially independent when you can live on 4% of your net worth each year, you'll need $312,500. $312,500 x 4% equals $12,500. Investing your $12,500 each year, we'd invest in VTSAX, Vanguard's Total Stock Market Index Fund, and assuming the 11.9% annual return of the market over the last 40 years, you are there, $317,175, in 11.5 years. Point 3 At this point, suppose you say, okay, I'm done with saving and I'm going to double my spending and spend my full earned $25,000 from now on. But I'll leave my $312,500 nest egg alone. In 10 short years it will have grown to $961.9463 without you having to add a single dime. That amount yields $38,478 a year at a 4% withdrawal rate. You can now not only quit working, you can give yourself a, rather substantial, raise. For the sake of simplicity, I've ignored taxes at this point. However, I've also assumed you'll never see an increase in income. Plus, I've tossed in VTSAX and 4% withdrawal rates. Don't worry, we'll look at those in depth a bit later. For now, we're just doing a bit of what-if analysis to help you see that your money can buy you something far more valuable than stuff. Unfortunately, few will ever even see this as an option. There are pervasive and powerful marketing forces at work seeking to obscure the idea that such a choice exists. We are relentlessly bombarded with messages telling us that we absolutely need the latest trinket and that we simply must have the most fashionable of currently trending trash. We're told that if you don't have the money, no problem. That's what credit cards and payday loans are for. It is this thinking that makes it so hard for most people to see that it is possible to reach $1 million net worth on an income of $25,000. This is not some evil conspiracy at work. It is simply business pursuing its own needs. But it is deadly to your wealth. The science behind the art of this persuasion is truly impressive, and the financial stakes are huge. The lines between need and want are continually and intentionally blurred. Years ago, a pal of mine had bought a new video camera. It was the best of the best and he was filming every moment of his young son's life. In a burst of enthusiasm he said, "You know, Jim, you just can't raise a child properly without one of these." Ah, no. Actually you can. In fact, billions of children have been raised over the course of human history without ever having been videotaped. And horrific as it may sound, many still are today. Including my own. You don't have to go far to meet someone who will tell you about all the things they can't live without. You likely know your share of people like this. But if you want to be wealthy, both by controlling your needs and expanding your assets, it pays to re-examine and question those beliefs. Chapter 4. How to think about money. Level 1, it's not just about spending. Get yourself a nice, crisp one of these. Now prop it up on the table in front of you and give some thought as to what it means to you. For instance, you might think about what you could buy with it right now. $100 buys a very nice dinner for two at a good restaurant. A fancy pair of sneakers. A tank of gas for your big-ass pick-em-up truck. A few bags of groceries. Maybe a nice sweater. I dunno. I don't buy much stuff, so this is hard for me. I did just buy a $119 LL Bean bed for my dog. It's going back. He won't sleep in it. You might think, I could invest this money. Historically, the stock market returns somewhere between 8 to 12% a year on average. I could spend that each year and still always have my $100 earning more for me. You might think, but inflation and market drops are a concern. I'll invest my $100 but only spend 4% a year. Any extra earnings I'll reinvest so my $100 grows and the money it throws off keeps pace with inflation. You might think, I'll invest this money and I'll reinvest what it earns and then reinvest what that earns, and years from now, after the power of compounding has worked its magic, I'll think about spending it. You can probably come up with other variations, but looking at these it's easy to see that one view will keep you poor, one will get you into the middle class, one will take that a step further and the last will make you rich. Consider Mike Tyson. Mr. Tyson was one of the most intimidating and formidable boxers of all time. Few have mastered the sweet science, boxing, better. The dismal science, economics, not so much. After earning some $300 million, he wound up bankrupt. A lifestyle reputed to cost $400,000 a month didn't help. And as is always the case with the suddenly wealthy and financially unaware, I suspect sharks looking to bite off chunks of that fortune for themselves rapidly surrounded him. But the root of the problem is that at the time he understood money only in terms of buying stuff. I don't mean to pick on Mr. Tyson. I'm not nuts after all. In this attitude towards money, he is not alone. The world is filled with athletes, performers, lawyers, doctors, business executives, and the like who have been showered with money that all too often immediately flowed right off of them and into the pockets of others. In a sense, they never really had a chance. They never learned how to think about money. It's not hard. Stop thinking about what your money can buy. Start thinking about what your money can earn. And then think about what the money it earns can earn. Once you begin to do this, you'll start to see that when you spend money, not only is that money gone forever, the money it might have earned is gone as well. And so on. Clearly, none of this is to say we should never spend money. Rather, it is to fully understand the implications when we do. Consider buying a car for $20,000. Even the least financially sophisticated person should see that once you buy the car you no longer have the 20 grand. I sure hope so, anyway. However, distressingly it appears that most people don't understand that in choosing to lease or borrow money to buy their car they are basically saying, geez, I don't want to pay $20,000 for this car. I want to pay much, much more. Level 2, consider opportunity costs. What you might not have considered, and what I'd like you to look at now, is the concept that even if you pay in cash, that car is going to cost you far more than $20,000. There is an opportunity cost to no longer having that money available to work for you. Opportunity cost is simply what you give up when you commit your money to one thing, like a car, over another, like an investment, and it's easy to quantify. All you need to do is select a proxy for how the money could be invested and earning for you should you choose not to spend it. Since I'll be constantly talking about, and explaining, VTSAX, Vanguard's Total Stock Market Index Fund, later in the book, let's use that. For now, all you need to know is that VTSAX is a total stock market index fund and as such it mirrors the market's average returns of 8 to 12% annually. As our proxy it gives us a tangible number to use as our opportunity cost. Let's use the lower end of the range, 8%. At 8%, $20,000 earns $1,600 per year. So your $20,000 car actually costs you $21,600. The original $20,000 plus the $1,600 it could have earned. But that's just in the first year, and you are suffering this opportunity cost every year. Over the 10 years you might own the car, that's 10x $1,600, $16,000. Now your $20,000 car is up to $36,000. That's really still understating things, however. We haven't even considered what those annual $1,600 chunks could have been earning themselves. And what those earnings could then have been earning. And so on. Should you not already be depressed enough about all this, remember That the $20,000 is gone forever, and so is the $1,600 in lost earnings year after year with no end. At the end of the day, it's one expensive damn car. You have probably heard of the magic of compounding. In short, the idea is that the money you save earns interest. That interest then earns interest itself. This causes a snowball effect as you earn interest on a bigger and bigger pool of money. Like the snowball, it starts small, but as it rolls along it soon begins to grow in a rather spectacular fashion. It's a beautiful thing. Think of opportunity cost as its evil twin. One of the beauties of being financially independent is that by definition, you have enough money such that the power of compounding is greater than the opportunity cost of what you spend. Once you have your FU money, all you need do is make sure you continue to reinvest to outpace inflation and keep your spending below the level your stash can replenish. If you are not yet financially independent and you see this as an attractive goal, you'll be well served to look at your spending through the prism of opportunity cost. Level 3, How to think about your investments. Warren Buffett is rather famously quoted as saying, "Rule number 1, never lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1." Unfortunately, too many people take this at face value and leap to the conclusion that Mr. Buffett has found a magical way to dance in and out of the market, avoiding the inevitable drops. This is not true, and in fact he is on record speaking to the folly of trying. The Dow started the last century at 66 and ended at 11,400. How could you lose money during a period like that? A lot of people did because they tried to dance in and out. The truth is that during the crash of 2008-9, Buffett lost about $25 billion, cutting his fortune from $62 billion to $37 billion. That left over $37 billion being the reason I was wandering around at the time irritating friends by saying, "Gee, I only wish I could have lost $25 billion. Like the rest of us, Buffett was unable to time the market, and in fact, knowing market timing to be a fool's errand, he didn't even try. But unlike many others, Buffett didn't panic and sell. He knew that such events are to be expected. In fact, he continued to invest as the sharp decline offered new opportunities. When the market recovered, as it always does, so did his fortune. So did the fortunes of all who stayed the course. That's why I put "lost" in quotes. Now there are likely many reasons Mr. Buffett didn't panic as that $25 billion and all the potential it represented slipped away. Having $37 billion left surely helped. Though another clue is in how he thinks about the money in his investments. Mr. Buffett talks in terms of owning the businesses in which he invests. Sometimes he owns them in part, as shares, and sometimes in their entirety. When the share price of one of his businesses drops, what he knows on a deep emotional level is that he still owns precisely the same amount of that company. As long as the company is sound, the fluctuations in its stock price are fairly inconsequential. They will rise and fall in the short term, but good companies earn real money along the way and in doing so their value rises relentlessly over time. We can learn to think in this same way. Again, let's use VTSAX in exploring this idea. Suppose yesterday you said, This idea of owning VTSAX makes sense to me. I'm gonna get me some. And having said that, you sent Vanguard a check for $10,000. At yesterday's close the price of VTSAX was $53.67. Your $10,000 bought you 186.3238308 shares. If VTSAX shares are trading at $56 per share a week from now, you might say, my $10,000 is now worth $10,434. Yippee! Mr. Collins sure is smart. If, however, the shares are trading at $52 per share a week from now, you might say, damn. My $10,000 is now only worth $9,689. That Collins guy is a bum. That's the typical way average investors look at their holdings. as little slips of paper or, more accurately in this day and age, little bits of data that go up or down in value. If that's all they are, drops in the price on any given day can be very, very scary. But there is a better, more accurate and more profitable way. Take a few moments to understand what you really own. At $56 per share or at $52 per share, you still own the same 186.3238308 shares of VTSAX. That in turns means you own a piece of virtually every publicly traded company in the US, roughly 3,700 the last time I checked. Once you truly understand this, you'll begin to realize that in owning VTSAX you are tying your financial future to that same large, diverse group of companies based in the most powerful, wealthiest and most influential country on the planet. These companies are filled with hardworking people focused on prospering in the changing world around them and dealing with all the uncertainties it can create. Some of these companies will fail, losing 100% of their value. Actually, they don't even have to fail and lose all of their value to fall off the index. Just dropping below a certain size or what's called market cap will be enough. As those fall away, they are replaced by other newer and more vital firms. Some will succeed in a spectacular fashion, growing 200%, 300%, 1,000%, 10,000% or more. There is no upside limit. As some stars fade, new ones are always on the rise. This is what makes the index, and by extension VTSAX, what I like to call self-cleansing. If I were to seek absolute security, a very different thing than the smooth ride most mistake for safety, I'd hold 100% in VTSAX and spend only the 2% dividend it throws off. Nothing is ever completely certain, but I can't think of a surer bet than this. We live in a complex world and the most useful and powerful tool for navigating it is money. It is essential to learn to use it. And that starts with learning how to think about it. It is never too late. Oh, and somebody please send Mr. Tyson a copy of this book. It's not too late for him either. Chapter 5. Investing in a raging bull, or bear. Market. As of January 2015, the S&P 500 stood at 2,059, up sharply from its March 2009 low around 677. This is the very definition of a raging bull market. Whether you are considering investing a new chunk of cash that has come your way, or thinking about selling and sitting on the sidelines for a while, it is times like these that test your core investing principles and beliefs. Here are some of mine. It is simply not possible to time the market, regardless of all the heavily credentialed gurus on CNBC and the like who claim they can. The market is the most powerful wealth-building tool of all time. The market always goes up and it is always a wild and rocky ride along the way. Since we can't predict these swings, we need to toughen up mentally and ride them out. I want my money working as hard as possible, as soon as possible. For novice investors, it is very difficult not to look at the past market swings and think, if only. If only I had sold when it was up. If only I had bought when it was down. But wishing doesn't make this possible. Since I launched www.jlcollinsnh.com in 2011, the market has been on one of its great bull runs, coming off one of its great bear crashes. On a fairly regular basis, I get questions and concerns like these. Is now a good time to invest, right before a possible stock market crash? A lot of people seem to think a stock market crash is just around the corner. I fear I'm entering at the wrong time. I'm afraid I'm investing right before a stock market crash. My fear had held me off for months, but I feel because I'm holding off I'm losing out. Out. I just want to get off to a good start, not a bad one. Maybe I should wait until after the crash so I don't lose a chunk of money. Should I just hold off until after a crash so I can make the most of my money? I'm just so fearful since I'm so new to this. If the market happened to be plunging into one of its periodic bear cycles, these questions, and the psychology, would be much the same. Should I wait until the market has bottomed out and then invest? This is all about fear and greed, the two major emotions that drive investors. Fear is perfectly understandable. Nobody wants to lose money. But until you master it, such fear will be deadly to your wealth. It will prevent you from investing. Once you are invested, it will cause you to flee in panic for the exits every time the market drops. And drop, repeatedly on its relentless march upward, it will. The curse of fear is that it will drive you to panic and sell when you should be holding. The market is volatile. Crashes, pullbacks and corrections are all absolutely normal. None of them are the end of the world, and none are even the end of the market's relentless rise. They are all, each and every one, expected parts of the process. Inevitably, as we'll discuss in part 2, there is a major market crash coming, and another after that. Over the decades you'll be investing, countless smaller corrections and pullbacks will occur as well. Learning to live with this reality is critical to successful investing over the long term. And successful investing is by definition long term. Any investing done short term is by definition speculation. Therefore, if we know a crash is coming, why not wait to invest? Or, if currently invested, why not sell, wait till the fall and then go back in? The answer is simply because we don't know when the crash will occur or end. Nobody does. Don't believe me? Think you can? Test yourself here. http://qz.com/487013 http://qz.com/487013 You may have heard that a lot of people think a stock market crash is just around the corner. That's certainly true, but there are also lots of people who say we are just at the beginning of this boom and we will never see them.
Copy link 5 kali.
S&P this low again.
InsyaAllah FYP.
Every day, heavily
Tengok
credentialed
video
experts
sampai
are
habis.
predicting a
Like, comment,
market crash.
copy link 5
At the same time, equally credentialed experts are predicting a boom. Who's right? Beats me. Both are predicting the future and nobody can do that reliably. So, why all the predictions? Simply because booms and busts are exciting. Get it right and your Wall Street/television reputation is made. Predicting them equals ratings, especially if the predictions are extreme. Predict the Dow soaring to 25,000 or crashing to 5,000 and people perk up. There is big money to be made doing this, for the gurus and cable TV shows anyway. For serious investors, however, all of this is useless and distracting noise. Worse, if you pay attention to it, it is positively dangerous to your wealth and your sanity. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 1900 to 2012 credit, www.stockcharts.com. www.stockcharts.com. History can help, but only on the broadest of scales. You see it in the chart above. The stock market always goes up. There are powerful reasons why. I can say, with almost absolute certainty, that 20 years from now the market will be higher than it is today. I'd even say with a high degree of confidence that 10 years out it will also be higher. 120 years of market history bears this out. However, this says nothing as to what the next few days, weeks, months or even years will bring. Here's the problem. There is simply no way to know where in time we are. Take another look at that chart. Could we be at a moment similar to January 2000 when the market peaked and went on to lose almost half of its value? Or in July of 2007 when it did the same? Sure, it is easy to see that pattern in retrospect. Or could that pattern have run its course, and now we find ourselves in a period more like the time the market passed 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000? Where each level was left in the dust, never to be seen again. Beats me. What we do know is that each of these milestones was surpassed at times like today when people were every bit as convinced that the market was too high and ready for a crash. With that said, let's assume we do know that right now, at 2102, the S&P 500 is at a peak and about to crash. Maybe a magic genie has told us so. Clearly we'll sell, or at least not buy. But now what? We want the gains. Only the market can deliver. So we want back in at some point. But when? Is this a 10% pullback? If so, we'll want to buy at 1,892 or so. What if it's a 20% decline, the official definition of a bear market? Then we don't want to buy until around 1,682. But what if we do that and it turns out this is a crash? Damn! In that case, we should have waited until it dropped all the way down to 1,200 or so. Where's that pesky genie when we really need him? The point is that to play this market timing game well even once, you need to be right twice. First you need to call the high. Then you need to call the low. And you must be able to do this repeatedly. The world is filled with sad investors who got the first right and then sat on the sidelines while the market recovered and marched right on past its old high. Market timing is an unwinnable game over time. How can I be so sure? Simple. The person who could reliably do this would be far richer than Warren Buffett and twice as lionized. Nothing, and I mean nothing, would be more profitable than this ability. That's what makes it so seductive. That's why gurus constantly claim they can do it, even if only a tiny bit. Nobody can. Not really. Not in any consistently useful way. Believing in Santa Claus is more profitable. Breeding unicorns is more likely. But I don't care that this timing can't be done. Using the following illustration, let's demonstrate what I'd care about if I were you. Let's assume you are 30 years old. You have some 60 or 70 investing years ahead. I'd look at that chart and note that some 60 years ago the Dow was trading at 250. By January 2015 it was around 17,823. That's through 60 years of turmoil and financial disasters, just like the ones sure to come over the next 60 years. Or just consider the last 20 years and the history of the S&P 500. In January 1995 it was around 500. By January 2015 it reached 2,059. And that includes 2000 to 2009, one of the all-time worst stretches in market history, capped off by a crash second only to the Great Depression. It is in this where the real magic is found. The stock market's wealth-building power over time is nothing short of breathtaking. But so is the ride along the way. Whether you invest today or sometime in the future, I guarantee your wealth will be cut in half more than once over those 60 years. You'll suffer many other setbacks as well. It is never fun, but it is the process, and the price you and everybody else must pay to enjoy the benefits. Thus the question is not, should I invest in stocks now? Rather it is, should you invest in stocks at all? Until you can come to terms with the harsh facts above, the answer is no. Until you can be absolutely certain that you can watch your wealth get cut in half and still stay the course, the answer is no. Until you are comfortable with the risks that come with the rewards you seek, the answer is no. In the end, only you can decide. Fortunately, investing doesn't have to be an all-or-nothing proposition. If you are willing to give up some performance, there are ways to smooth out the ride a bit. It is done with asset allocation, which we'll discuss in Chapter 14. Note, in referencing the market's performance in this chapter, you may have noticed I jumped between using the Dow and the S&P as the indexes. I prefer the S&P because it is broader and therefore a bit more precise. But the Dow goes back further in history and is more useful, and available, for the long view. If you overlay their charts over time, they track together with remarkable consistency, making them, for our purposes, indistinguishable. Part 2. How to harness the world's most powerful wealth-building tool. Simplicity is the keynote of all true elegance. Coco Chanel. Chapter 6. There's a major market crash coming. And even famous economists can't save you. One day a few years back, I found myself feeling a bit testy. I had just finished an article in a popular money magazine, and reading this particular magazine is, in and of itself, enough to make me testy. This particular article featured an interview with a famous economist and finance professor at an equally famous and prestigious university. There were impressive photos of the good professor looking serious and imposing. To begin part 2 of our financial journey together, I'm going to tell you some of what he said and why he's wrong. It is typical of the common wisdom you'll come across outside this book, and in exploring it together we'll touch on some key subjects we'll examine in detail in later chapters. Oh, and that major market crash that's coming? Don't worry. I'm also going to tell you why it doesn't matter. First, in fairness to the famous economist, I have no quarrel with most of his ideas. Where I do, it is possible the good folks at the magazine didn't quite get it right. Perhaps they simply didn't place the emphasis correctly. Maybe someday this economist and I will have a few laughs over a cup of coffee about it. Or not. In the interview, the professor contends that the long-held theory of efficient markets, which says existing share prices almost instantly incorporate and reflect all relevant information, is morphing into what he calls the adaptive markets hypothesis. The idea is that with new trading technologies the market has become faster moving and more volatile. That means greater risk. True enough, and so far so good. But he goes on to say this means, buy and hold investing doesn't work anymore. The magazine interviewer then points out, and good for him, that even during the lost decade of the 2000s, the buy and hold strategy of stock investing would have returned 4%. The professor responds, think about how that person earned 4%. He lost 30%, saw a big bounce back, and so on, and the compound rate of return was 4%. But most investors did not wait for the dust to settle. After the first 25% loss, they probably reduced their holdings, and only got part way back in after the market somewhat recovered. It's human behavior. Hold the bloody phone. Correct premise, wrong conclusion. We'll come back to this in a moment. Magazine, so what choice do I have instead? Professor, we're in an awkward period of our industry where we haven't developed good alternatives. Your best bet is to hold a variety of mutual funds that have relatively low fees and try to manage the volatility within a reasonable range. You should be diversified not just with stocks and bonds but across the entire spectrum of investment opportunities, stocks, bonds, currencies, commodities, and domestically and internationally. Magazine, does the government have a role in preventing these crises? Professor, it's not possible to prevent financial crises. In the online comments for the article, a reader named Patrick nailed the flaw, so, markets are efficient except when they're not. And buy and hold doesn't work because most people don't stick to it at the wrong time. Okay, wisdom, but is this news? Gold star, Patrick. Worse still is the professor's recommendation to hold the entire spectrum of investment opportunities. This is his solution to dealing with the new investing world his adaptive markets hypothesis implies. Seems odd, since he contends buy and hold no longer works, to suggest investors buy and hold nearly every asset class imaginable. Huh. Let's accept the professor's premise that markets have gotten more volatile and will likely stay that way. I'm not sure I buy it, but okay, he's the credentialed economist. We can also agree that the typical investor is prone to panic and poor decision-making, especially when all the cable news gurus are lining up on window ledges. We certainly agree that it is not possible to prevent financial crises. More are headed our way. So the question that matters most is, how do we best deal with it? The professor, and many like him, says, treat the symptoms. He defaults to the all-too-common canard of broad asset allocation. He would have us invest in everything and hope a couple of those puppies pull through. To do this properly would require a ton of work. You would need to understand all the various asset classes, decide what percentage to hold of each and choose how to own them. Once you did that, you'd need to track them, rebalancing is necessary. The result of all of this effort is to guarantee subpar performance over time while offering the slim hope of increased security. I am reminded of the quote, "Those who would trade liberty for security deserve neither." I say, toughen up, cupcake, and cure your bad behavior. This means you must recognize the counterproductive psychology that causes bad investment decisions, such as panic selling, and correct it in yourself. In doing so, your investments will be far simpler and your results far stronger. To start, you need to understand a few things about the stock market. 1. Market crashes are to be expected. What happened in 2008 was not something unheard of. It has happened before and it will happen again. And again. In the 40-odd years I've been investing, we've had the Great Recession of 1974 to 75. The massive inflation of the late 1970s and early 1980s. Raise your hand if you remember win buttons, whip inflation now. Mortgage rates were pushing 20%. You could buy 10-year Treasury notes paying 15% or more. The now infamous 1979 Business Week cover, The Death of Equities, which, as it turned out, marked the coming of the greatest bull market of all time. The crash of 1987, including Black Monday, the biggest one-day drop in history. Brokers were literally on the window ledges and more than a couple took the leap. The recession of the early 1990s. The tech crash of the late 1990s. 9/11. And that little dust-up in 2008. 2. The market always recovers. Always. And, if someday it really doesn't, no investment will be safe and none of this financial stuff will matter anyway. In 1974 the Dow closed at 616.4. At the end of 2014 it was 17,823.4. Over that 40-year period, January 1975 to January 2015, it grew, with dividends reinvested, at an annualized rate of 11.9%. If you had invested $1,000 and just let it ride, it would have grown to $89.7902 as 2015 dawned. An impressive result through all those disasters above. All you would have had to do was toughen up and let it ride. Take a moment and let that sink in. Everybody makes money when the market is rising. But what determines whether it will make you wealthy or leave you bleeding on the side of the road is what you do during the times it is collapsing. 3. The market always goes up. Always. Bet no one's told you that before. But it's true. Understand, this is not to say it is a smooth ride. It's not. It is most often a wild and rocky road. But it always, and I mean always, goes up. Not every year. Not every month. Not every week, and certainly not every day. But take a moment and look again at the chart of the stock market in the last chapter. The trend is relentlessly, through disaster after disaster, up. 4. The market is the single best performing investment class over time, bar none. 5. The next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years will have just as many collapses, recessions and disasters as in the past. Like the good professor says, it's not possible to prevent them. Every time this happens your investments will take a hit. Every time it will be scary as hell. Every time all the smart guys will be screaming, sell. And every time only those few with enough nerve will stay the course and prosper. 6. This is why you have to toughen up, learn to ignore the noise and ride out the storm, adding still more money to your investments as you go. 7. To be strong enough to stay the course you need to know these bad things are coming, not only intellectually but on an emotional level as well. You need to know this deep in your gut. They will happen. They will hurt. But like blizzards in winter, they should never be a surprise. And, unless you panic, they won't matter. 8. There's a major market crash coming. And there'll be another after that. What wonderful buying opportunities there'll be. I tell my 24-year-old that during her 60 to 70 odd years of being an investor, she can expect to see 2008 level financial meltdowns every 25 years or so. That's 2 to 3 of these economic, end-of-the-world, events coming her, and your, way. Smaller collapses will occur even more often. The thing is, they are never the end of the world. They are part of the process. So is all the panic that surrounds them. Don't worry. The world isn't going to end on our watch. It is hubris to think it will. Of course, over those same years she's going to see several major bull markets as well. Some will rage beyond all reason, along with the hype that will surround them. When those occur, the financial media will declare, this time it's different, with all the same confidence as when they claimed the end had come. In this too they will be wrong. In the next few chapters, we'll discuss why the market always goes up, and I'll tell you exactly how to invest at each stage of your life, wind up rich and stay that way. You won't believe how simple it is. But you're gonna have to be tough. Chapter 7. The market always goes up. In 1987, on what was later to be called Black Monday, I called my broker at the end of a very busy day. Remember that this was when we all still had stockbrokers. When we were in the dark ages before cell phones, personal computers, the internet and online trading. "Hi Bob," I said cheerfully. "How's it going?" There was a long silent pause. "You're kidding," he said. "Right?" He sounded dreadful. "Kidding about what?" "Jim, we've just had the biggest meltdown in history. Customers have been screaming at me all day. It's a panic. The market is down over 500 points. Over 22%. That was the point at which I joined the rest of the planet in being absolutely stunned. It is hard to describe just what this was like. Not even the Great Depression had seen a day like this one. Nor have we since. Truly, it looked like the end of the financial world. A week or so later Time magazine featured a cover with huge type declaring, "The crash after a wild week on Wall Street, the world is different." Of course, in this they were completely wrong. Crashes, even huge ones like this, are a normal part of the process. As any educated investor does, I knew that the market was volatile. I knew that on its relentless march upwards there could and would be sharp drops, corrections, and bear markets. I knew that the best course was to hold firm and not panic. But this? This was a whole nother frame of reference. I held tight for 3 or 4 months. Stocks continued to drift ever lower. I knew this was normal, but unfortunately I knew it only on an intellectual level. I hadn't yet learned it deep enough in my gut. Finally, I lost my nerve and sold. I just wasn't tough enough. That day when I sold it was, if not the absolute bottom, close enough to it as not to matter. Then, of course and as always, the market again began its inevitable climb. The market always goes up. It took a year or so for me to regain my nerve and get back in. By then it had passed its pre-Black Monday high. I had managed to lock in my losses and pay a premium for a seat back at the table. It was expensive. It was stupid. It was an embarrassing failure of nerve. I just wasn't tough enough. But I am now. My mistake of '87 taught me exactly how to weather all the future storms that came rolling in, including the Class 5 financial hurricane of 2008. It taught me to be tough and ultimately it made me far more money than the admittedly expensive education cost. As one of my blog readers put it, we've stayed the course, with a side dish of panic. It's a great line, and staying the course is always served with a side dish of panic. That's why you gotta be tough. Here's our chart of the stock market's history again. The Dow Jones Industrial Average 1900 to 2012 credit, www.stockcharts.com. www.stockcharts.com. Can you find my 1987 blip? It's there and easy to spot, but not quite so scary in context. Take a moment and let this chart sink in. You should notice three things. Through disaster after disaster, the market always makes its way higher over time. It's a wild ride along the way. There is a big, ugly event. Let's talk about the good news first. We'll tackle those other points later. To understand why the market always goes up, we need to look a bit more closely at what the market actually is. Publicly traded companies are companies that issue stock that can be purchased by individuals and organizations. When you buy stock in a company, you own a piece of that business. The stock market is made up of all the companies that are publicly traded. The chart above represents the DJIA, Dow Jones Industrial Average. We are looking at the DJIA because it is the only group of stocks created as a proxy for the entire stock market going back this far. Way back in 1896, a guy named Charles Dow selected 12 stocks from leading American industries to create his index. Today the DJIA is comprised of 30 large American companies. But now let's shift away from the DJIA index, which I only introduced for its long historical perspective, to a more useful and comprehensive index, the CRSP US Total Market Index. Don't let that technical sounding name scare you. For our purposes here, all you need to understand is that it is an index of virtually every publicly traded company in the US. More importantly, it is the index that Vanguard currently uses to model their Total Stock Market Index Fund, VTSAX. By design, they are almost precisely the same. Since we can invest in VTSAX, going forward I'll be using it as our proxy for the stock market overall. Last time I checked, and this will vary, VTSAX held about 3,700 companies. This means that in owning VTSAX, you own a piece of all these businesses. In 1976, John Bogle, the founder of the Vanguard Group, launched the world's first index fund. It tracked the S&P 500 index, allowing investors to own the largest 500 or so companies in the US in one low-cost fund. It instantly became the single best tool for taking advantage of the market's relentless climb. Then, in 1992, Vanguard created the Total Stock Market Index Fund, and investors could own in this one fund not just the 500 largest U.S. companies, but virtually the entire U.S. stock market. Now a quick note about something that can be confusing. Vanguard's Total Stock Market Index Fund comes in multiple varieties: VTSAX, VTSMX, VTI, and a couple of others. We'll talk about why and how these vary a bit later. But what is important to understand now is that they each hold exactly the same portfolio created using that CRSP index. Essentially, they are the same. VTSAX is what's called the Admiral Shares version. It is the one I personally own, and that's why I'm using it here. So now we know what the stock market actually is, and we can see from the chart that it always goes up. Let's take a moment to consider, how can this be? There are two basic reasons. 1. The market is self-cleansing. Take a look at the 30 DJIA stocks. Care to guess how many of the original 12 are still in it? Just one. General Electric. In fact, most of today's 30 companies didn't exist when Mr. Dow originally crafted his list. Most of the originals have come and gone or morphed into something new. This is a key point: the market is not stagnant. Companies routinely fade away and are replaced with new blood. The same is true of VTSAX. It holds almost every publicly traded company in the US stock market. Now, picture all 3,700 of these companies along a classic bell curve graph that describes their annual stock performance. Generic bell curve graph. Those few at the left will be the worst performing. Those few to the right, the best. All those between are at various points of performance. What is the worst possible performance a bad stock can deliver? It can lose 100% of its value and have its stock price drop to zero. Then, of course, it disappears never to be heard from again. Now let's consider the right side of the curve. What is the best performance a stock can deliver? 100% return. Certainly that's possible. But so is 200%, 300%, 1000%, 10,000% or more. There is no upside limit. The net result is a powerful upward bias. We could model all 3,700 stocks in VTSAX this way, and we'd find that as some stars fade, new companies launch, grow, prosper, and go public. This process of the new replacing the dead and dying is what makes the market, and VTSAX as its proxy, self-cleansing. But note, this only works with broad-based index funds. Once professional management starts trying to beat the system, all bets are off. They can, and most often do, make things much worse, and they always charge more fees to do so. We'll talk a bit more about this in a later chapter. 2. Owning stock is owning a part of living. Breathing, dynamic companies, each striving to succeed. To appreciate why the stock market relentlessly rises requires an understanding of what we actually own with VTSAX. We own, quite literally, a piece of virtually every publicly traded company in the US. Stocks are not just little slips of traded paper. When you own stock, you own a piece of a business. These are companies filled with people working endlessly to expand and serve their customer base. They are competing in an unforgiving environment that rewards those who can make it happen and discards those who can't. It is this intense dynamic that makes stocks and the companies they represent the most powerful and successful investment class in history. So, now we have this wonderful wealth-building tool that relentlessly marches upward, but, and this is a major but, that causes many people to actually lose money in the market. Boy howdy, it's a wild and unsettling ride. Plus, there's that big ugly event. We'll talk about those next. Chapter 8. Why most people lose money in the market. In the preceding chapter, I presented to you a very rosy view of the stock market and its wealth-building potential. Everything I wrote is true. But, this too is true. Most people lose money in the stock market. Here's why. 1. We think we can time the market. While stepping out when it is high and back in when it is low sounds enormously appealing, it is almost impossible to do. The reality is that we usually buy high and sell low, panicking when times are tough and buying when the market is soaring. This applies to all of us. It is the way humans are hardwired. Over the past 20-odd years, an array of academic papers have appeared investigating the psychology of investors. The results aren't pretty. Seems we are psychologically unsuited to prosper in a volatile market. The details of this research are beyond the scope of this book. But what is important is that it takes an act of will, awareness, and effort to understand, accept, and then change this destructive behavior. Here's a sobering fact. The vast majority of investors in mutual funds actually manage to get worse returns from their funds than the funds themselves generate and report. Let that little nugget sink in for a moment. How can this be? Our psychology is such that we can't help trying to time the market. We tend to jump in and out, almost always at the wrong times. 2. We believe we can pick individual stocks. You can't pick winning stocks. Don't feel bad. I can't either. Nor can the overwhelming majority of professionals in the business. The fact that this ability is so rare is the key reason why the very few who apparently can are so famous. Oh, sure. Occasionally we can, and, oh my, what a heady feeling it is when it works. It is incredibly seductive. Picking a stock that soars is an intense and addictive high. The media is filled with winning strategies that feed on this delusion. I am not immune from the attraction. Back in 2011 I thought I had spotted a trend and as it happened made 19% in 4 months on the 5 stocks I chose. Sigh. I still have this addiction. That's almost 60% annualized, while the market was flat for the year. That's spectacular, if I do say so myself. It is also impossible to do year after year. It's a great rush, but a very poor foundation upon which to try and build wealth. Even slightly beating the index year after year is incredibly difficult. Only a handful of investors have been able to modestly beat it over time. Doing so makes them superstars. That's why Warren Buffett, Michael Price and Peter Lynch are household names. That's why I don't let my occasional win go to my head. That's why I let index funds do the heavy lifting in my portfolio. 3. We believe we can pick winning mutual fund managers. Actively managed stock mutual funds, funds run by professional managers, as opposed to index funds, are a huge and highly profitable business. Profitable for the companies that run them. For their investors, not so much. So profitable that there are actually more mutual funds out there than stocks. According to the U.S. News and World Report, 5 as of 2013 there were about 4,600 equity, stock, mutual funds operating in the U.S. Recall there are only about 3,700 publicly traded stocks in the U.S. You read that correctly. Yeah, I'm amazed too. The article goes on to say about 7% of funds fail each year. At that rate, more than half, 2,374 of those 4,600, will fold during the next decade. With so much money at stake, investment companies are forever launching new funds while burying the ones that flounder. The financial media is filled with stories of winning managers and funds, and lavishly profitable advertising from them. Past records are analyzed. Managers are interviewed. Companies like Morningstar are built around researching and ranking funds. The fact is, few fund managers will beat the index over time. In 2013, Vanguard posted the results of their research on this. Starting in 1998 they looked at all of the 1,540 actively managed equity funds that existed at the time. Over the next 15 years only 55% of these funds survived and only 18% managed to both survive and outperform the index. 82% failed to outperform the unmanaged index. But 100% of them charged their clients high fees to try. While we can clearly see those that succeeded now, there is no predicting which funds will be in that rarefied 18% going forward. Every fund prospectus carries this phrase, past results are not a guarantee of future performance. It is the most ignored sentence in the whole document. It is also the most accurate. Other academic studies suggest that when looking at longer time periods, even an outperformance rate of 18% is wildly optimistic. In the February 2010 issue of the Journal of Finance, Professors Laurent Barras, Olivier Scalet and Russ Wormers presented their study of 2,076 actively managed U.S. stock funds over the 30 years from 1976 to 2006. Their conclusion? Only 0.6% showed any skill at besting the index or, as the researchers put it, the result was, statistically indistinguishable from zero. They are not alone. Brad Barber of UC Davis and Terence O'Dean of UC Berkeley found that only about 1% of active traders outperform the market and that the more frequently they trade, the worse they do. With this terrible track record, you might be wondering how is it that so many fund companies run ads that claim most, if not all, of their funds have outperformed the market. With so much money at stake it is not surprising that they have their tricks. One is simply to selectively choose a time frame for measurement that happens to work in their favor. Another just takes advantage of all those dead and dying funds. Mutual fund companies launch new funds all the time. Random chance is enough to predict a few will do well, at least for a while. Those that don't are quietly closed and the assets folded into something doing better. The bad fund disappears and the company can continue to claim its funds are all stars. Cute. There's lots of money to be made with actively managed funds. Just not by the investors. 4. We focus on the foam. Imagine you've been reading this book on a nice warm summer's afternoon. Richly deserving of a reward, you crack open a bottle of your favorite brew and pour it into a nice chilled glass. If you've done this before, you know that if you carefully pour it down the side, you'll wind up with a glass filled mostly with beer and a small foam head. Pour it fast and down the center and you can easily have a glass with a little beer filled mostly with foam. Imagine now someone else has poured it for you, out of sight, and into a dark mug you can't see through. You have no way of knowing how much is beer and how much is foam. That's the stock market. See, the stock market is really two related but very different things. It is the beer, the actual operating businesses of which we can own a part. It is the foam, the traded pieces of paper that furiously rise and fall in price from moment to moment. This is the market of CNBC. This is the market of the daily stock market report. This is the market people are talking about when they liken Wall Street to Las Vegas. This is the market of the daily, weekly, monthly and yearly volatility that drives the average investor out the window and onto the ledge. This is the market that, if you are smart and want to build wealth over time, you will absolutely ignore. When you look at the daily price of a given stock, it is very hard to know how much is foam. This is why a company can plummet in value one day, and soar the next. This is why CNBC routinely features experts, each impressively credentialed, confidently predicting where the market is going next, while consistently contradicting each other. It is all those traders competing to guess how much beer and how much foam is actually in the glass at any particular moment. While this makes for great drama and television, for our purposes it is only the beer that matters. It is the beer that is the real operating money making underlying businesses, beneath all that foam and froth, that over time drives the market ever higher. Understand too, that what the media wants from these commentators is drama. Nobody is going to sit glued to their TV while some rational person talks about long-term investing. But get somebody to promise the Dow is going to 20,000 by year's end or, better yet, is on the verge of careening into the abyss, and brother, you've got ratings. But it's all just so much foam, fluff and noise. It doesn't matter to us. We're in it for the beer. Chapter 9. The Big Ugly Event. So far we've seen that the stock market is a wonderful wealth-building tool that moves relentlessly upward. Vanguard's Total Stock Market Index Fund, VTSAX, is the only tool we need to access it. But we've also seen that it is extremely volatile, crashes routinely, and most people lose money due to their psychological tendencies. Still, if we toughen up, ride out the turbulence and show a little humility regarding our investing acumen, this is the surest path to riches. Except the Dow Jones Industrial Average 1900 to 2012 credit, www.stockcharts.com. www.stockcharts.com. There, in 1929, is the big ugly event. The mother of all stock market crashes and the beginning of the Great Depression. Over a 2-year period, stocks plunged from 391 to 41, losing 90% of their value along the way. Should you have been unlucky enough to have invested at the peak, your portfolio wouldn't have fully recovered until the mid-1950s, 26 years later. Yikes! That's enough to try the toughest investor. If you had been buying stocks on margin, that is, with money borrowed from your broker, as was all too common at the time, you would have been completely wiped out. Many speculators were. Fortunes were lost overnight. Never buy stocks on margin. So what to do? Does the possibility of another big ugly event blow a big enough hole in this idea of toughen up and ride out the storms to make it useless? The answer to that has everything to do with your tolerance for risk and your desire to build wealth. There are ways to mitigate the risk, and we'll talk about them later. For now, let's step back and consider a few key points regarding the big ugly. 1. It would have taken an investor of exceptionally bad luck to have borne the full weight of the crash. You would have had to buy your entire portfolio precisely at the 1929 peak. Suppose instead you had invested in 1926 to 27. Looking at our chart, this is about halfway up on the climb to the peak. Many people were entering the market in these years. Certainly they were destined to lose all their gains, and yet 10 years later, had they held on, they'd be back in positive territory. Although another rough stretch was coming. Suppose you'd bought at the earlier peak in 1920. You would have taken an immediate hit and recovered 5 years later. From the collapse in 29 you'd be back even by 1936. 7 years. The point is that any given start would have yielded a different outcome, and one not as severe as the widely quoted 90% loss, peak to bottom. 2. Suppose you were just out of school and beginning your career in 1929. Assuming you were in the fortunate 75% that kept their jobs, you would have had decades of opportunities to buy stocks at bargain prices. Ironically, a crash at the beginning of your investing life is a gift. In fact, any pullback in stock prices is a gift while you are in the process of accumulating your wealth. It allows you to buy more shares for your dollars, on sale if you will. 3. Suppose in 1929 you were retired with $1 million. By 1932 your portfolio is down 90% to $100,000. A terrible hit for sure. But remember, the Depression was a deflationary event. That means the prices of goods and services fell dramatically, along with those of stocks. And that means your $100,000, while no longer $1 million, now had far more buying power than that same amount did pre-crash. Plus, it was poised to grow rather sharply from this low. 4. The big ugly event has happened only once in the last 115 years. Longer actually, but that's how far back our DJIA data goes. We haven't had another in 86 years. Some even argue that with the controls put in place since 1929 it is unlikely we ever will again. While we can't be sure of that, we do know these are extremely rare events. 5. In 2008 we came right to the edge of the abyss. Closer I think than most folks fully appreciate. But we didn't tumble over. This I find encouraging. What is not so encouraging is that a deflationary depression like that of 1929 is only one of the 2 possible economic disasters that can destroy wealth on a major scale. The other is hyperinflation. Here in the US, we haven't had to deal with this monster since the Revolutionary War way back in 1776. But it destroyed Zimbabwe's economy as recently as 2008. Hungary had the worst case of it in history when in July 1946, the peak inflation rate reached 41.9 quadrillion%, and many credit the German hyperinflation of the 1920s with ushering the Nazis to power in the 1930s. Hyperinflation is very bad news, every bit as destructive as deflation, and it is exactly what it sounds like, inflation running out of control. A little inflation can be a very healthy thing for an economy. It allows for prices and wages to expand. It keeps the economic wheels greased and running smoothly. It is the antidote to looming deflationary depressions. In a deflationary environment, delayed buying decisions are rewarded. If you were considering a new house in 2009 to 13, you would have noticed that prices were dropping, along with mortgage interest rates. Recognizing you could get both for less later, you waited. If enough potential buyers joined you, demand would drop, pulling prices and rates down further. Delay is rewarded and action is punished. Too much of this and the market slips into a deadly spiral of crashing prices. But during periods of inflation, anything you want to buy will cost more tomorrow than today. You have an incentive to buy that house, or car, or appliance, or loaf of bread, today and beat the price increase. Delay is punished with higher prices later, and action now is rewarded. Buyers become ever more motivated. Sellers become ever more reluctant. Too much of this and the market slips into a deadly spiral of increasingly worthless currency people are desperate to exchange for goods. Governments love a little inflation. They can add money to the system, keep the economy humming and not have to raise taxes or cut spending to do it. In fact, it is sometimes called the hidden tax because it erodes the buying power of our currency. It also allows debtors, like the government, to pay back their creditors with cheaper dollars. The good news for our VTSAX wealth building strategy, which we'll discuss in depth in the next few chapters, is that stocks are a pretty good inflation hedge. As we've discussed, in owning stocks we own businesses. These businesses have assets and create products. The value of those rise with inflation, providing a hedge against the falling value of the currency. This is especially true in times of low to moderate inflation. The decision every investor must make is how much risk to accept in the wealth building process. Looking at the past 100+ years, you have to ask yourself whether it makes sense to focus on the big ugly or to invest in the relentless rise that has dominated history. None of this is to say that big ugly events are not very scary and destructive things. But they are rare, and in the context of our overriding approach, spend less than you earn, invest the surplus, avoid debt, they are survivable. In the next few chapters we'll look at specific investments to build and protect your wealth. As I promised in part 1, you won't believe how simple it is. Chapter 10. Keeping it simple, considerations and tools. Simple is good. Simple is easier. Simple is more profitable. That's a key mantra of this book, and what I'm going to share with you in these next couple of chapters is the soul of simplicity. With it, you'll learn all you need to know to produce better investment results than at least 82%, per the Vanguard study referenced in Chapter 8, of the professionals and active amateurs out there. It will take almost none of your time, and you can focus on all the other things that make your life rich and beautiful. How can this be? Isn't investing complicated? Don't I need professionals to guide me? No and no. Since the days of Babylon, people have been coming up with investments, mostly to sell to other people. There is a strong financial incentive to make these investments complex and mysterious. But the simple truth is this: the more complex an investment is, the less likely it is to be profitable. Index funds outperform actively managed funds. In large part simply because actively managed funds require expensive active managers. Not only are they prone to making investing mistakes, their fees are a continual performance drag on the portfolio. But they are very profitable for the companies that run them, and as such are heavily promoted. Of course, those profits and promotional costs arise from all those juicy fees that come directly out of your pocket. Not only do you not need complex investments for success, they actually work against you. At best they are costly. At worst, they are a cesspool of swindlers. They are not worth your time. We can do better. Here's all you are going to need: 3 considerations and 3 tools. The 3 considerations you'll want to consider. In what stage of your investing life are you? The wealth accumulation stage or the wealth preservation stage? Or perhaps a blend of the two? What level of risk do you find acceptable? Is your investment horizon long-term or short-term? As you've surely noticed, these 3 are closely linked. Your level of risk will vary with your investment horizon. Both will tilt the direction of your investing stage. All 3 will be linked to your current employment and future plans. Only you can make these decisions, but let me offer a couple of guiding thoughts. Safety is a bit of an illusion. There is no risk-free investment. Once you begin to accumulate wealth, risk is a fact of life. You can't avoid it, you only get to choose what kind. Don't let anyone tell you differently. If you bury your cash in the backyard, or in an FDIC-insured bank account at today's near-zero interest rates, and dig it up 20 years from now, you'll still have the same amount of money. But even modest inflation levels will have drastically reduced its spending power. If you invest in stocks, you'll likely outpace inflation and build wealth, but you'll have to endure a volatile ride. Your stage is not necessarily linked to your age. The wealth accumulation stage comes while you are working, saving, and adding money to your investments. The wealth preservation stage comes once your earned income slows or ends. Your investments are then left to grow and/or are called upon to provide income for you. You might be planning to retire early. You might be worried about your job. You might be taking a sabbatical. You might be accepting a lower paid position to follow a dream. You might be launching a new business. You might be returning to the workforce after several years of retirement. Your life stages may well shift several times over the course of your life. Your investment stage can easily shift with them. Money is critical. If you don't yet have yours, I suggest you start building it now. It is never too late to start. Be persistent. Life is uncertain. The job you have and love today can disappear tomorrow. Remember that nothing money can buy is more important than your fiscal freedom. In this modern world of ours, no tool is more important. Don't be too quick to think short-term. Most of us are, or should be, long-term investors. The typical investment advisor's rule of thumb is, subtract your age from 100, or more aggressively 120. The result is the percentage of your portfolio that should be in stocks. A 60-year-old should, by this calculation, have 40% or 60% in stocks and 60%, or 40%, in conservative, wealth-preserving bonds. Nonsense. Here's the problem. Even modest inflation destroys the value of bonds over time, and bonds can't offer the compensating growth potential of stocks. If you are just starting out at age 20, you are looking at perhaps 80 years of investing. Maybe even a century if life expectancies continue to expand. Even at 60 and in good health, you could easily be looking at another 30 years. That's long term in my book. Perhaps you have a younger spouse. Or maybe you want to leave some money to your kids, grandkids, or to a charity. All will have their own long-term horizons. The 3 tools. Once you've sorted through your 3 considerations, you are ready to build your portfolio, and you'll need only these 3 tools to do it. See, I promised this would be simple. 1. Stocks, VTSAX, Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund. Stocks provide the best returns over time and serve as our inflation hedge. This is our core wealth building tool. See Chapter 17 for variants of this same fund. 2. Bonds, VBTLX, Vanguard Total Bond Market Index Fund. Bonds provide income, tend to smooth out the rough ride of stocks, and serve as our deflation hedge. 3. Cash. Cash is good to have around to cover routine expenses and to meet emergencies. Cash is also king during times of deflation. The more prices drop, the more your cash can buy. But when prices rise, inflation, its value steadily erodes. In these days of low interest rates, idle cash doesn't have much earning potential. I suggest you keep as little as possible on hand, consistent with your needs and comfort level. We used to keep ours in VMXX, Vanguard Prime Money Market Fund. At the time, interest rates were higher and money market funds typically offered better interest rates than bank savings accounts. But with interest rates currently at historic lows, money market funds pay close to 0%. Bank interest rates are now slightly higher. Plus they come with FDIC insurance on accounts up to $250,000. For these reasons, we now keep our cash in our local bank and in our online bank, which happens to be Ally. Should interest rates rise and money market funds again offer better rates, we'll switch back. So that's it. 3 simple tools. 2 index mutual funds and a money market and/or bank account. A wealth builder, an inflation hedge, a deflation hedge, and cash for daily needs and emergencies. As promised, it's low cost, effective, diversified, and simple. You can fine-tune your allocation in each investment to meet your own personal considerations. Want a smoother ride? Willing to accept a lower long-term return and slower wealth accumulation? Just increase the percentage in VBTLX and/or cash. Want maximum growth potential? Hold more in VTSAX. In the coming chapters, we'll talk about index funds and bonds. Then we'll explore a couple of specific strategies and portfolios to get you started, and take a look at how to select the asset allocation best suited to your needs and temperament. Chapter 11. Index funds are really just for lazy people, right? No. Index investing is for people who want the best possible results. Over the past couple of years, some of my investing ideas have drawn comment from other writers. While honored, I've noticed that even those folks seeking to compliment me sometimes frame my position on Vanguard and index funds as sound advice, but only for average people who don't want to work very hard at investing. The idea being that with a little more effort and smarts in the selection of individual stocks and/or actively managed funds, more diligent folks can do better. Rubbish. Back in Chapter 7, I introduced you to Jack Bogle. For my money, pun intended, no one has done more for the individual investor than Mr. Bogle. From launching Vanguard and its unique structure that benefits shareholders to creating index funds, he is a titan in the financial industry, an investing saint and a personal hero. Now in his 80s, here's what he has to say about successfully besting the market. I've been in this business 61 years and I can't do it. I've never met anybody who can do it. I've never met anybody who's met anybody who can do it. Neither have I. This reality is something he had recognized decades earlier working on his thesis as a student, and his decades in the business only served to confirm it. Namely, buying all the stocks in the market index reliably and consistently outperforms professional management, especially when taking costs into consideration. The basic concept of indexing is that, since the odds of selecting stocks that outperform are vanishingly small, better results will be achieved by buying every stock in a given index. This idea fundamentally challenged and threatened the rationale behind paying high fees to Wall Street professionals. Not surprisingly, the pushback was swift and harsh. Mr. Bogle was roundly ridiculed at the time and in some quarters still is. But increasingly over the past 40 years since his launch of the first index fund, the validity of Bogle's idea has been repeatedly confirmed. The harsh truth is, I can't pick winning individual stocks and you can't either. Nor can the vast majority who claim they can. It is extraordinarily difficult, expensive and a fool's errand. Having the humility to accept this will do wonders for your ability to accumulate wealth. There is even a school of thought that suggests superstar investors. Think Warren Buffett, Peter Lynch and Michael Price, are simply lucky. Even for a hardcore indexer like me, that is tough to wrap my head around. Yet the research suggests that only 1% of the very top tier of money managers outperform, and on the rare occasion they do, it is hard to distinguish skill from luck. So if this is the case, why do so many still resist the idea of indexing? I think there is a lot of psychology behind it. These are a few of the reasons that occur to me. 1. It is a challenge for smart people to accept that they can't outperform an index that simply buys everything. It seems it should be so easy to spot the good companies and avoid the bad. It's not. This was my personal hang-up, and I wasted years and many thousands of dollars in the vain pursuit of outperformance. Consider that in the 1960s the US government was seriously considering, it never happened, the forced breakup of General Motors. GM was deemed so dominant and powerful that no other car company could compete. This is the same GM that survives today only by the grace of a huge bailout by that same government. On the other hand, back in the 1990s the smart money was betting Apple might not survive. As of this writing it is the single largest US company as measured by market capitalization. Today's stars are tomorrow's wrecks. Today's fallen are tomorrow's exciting turnarounds. 2. To buy the index is to accept the market's average return. People have trouble accepting the idea of themselves or anything in their life as average. But in this context the word average is mostly misunderstood. Rather than meaning index fund returns are at the midpoint, the word average here means the combined performance of all the stocks in an index. Professional money managers are measured against how well they do against this return. As we've seen, in any given year most underperform their target index. Indeed, over periods of 15 to 30 years, the index will outperform 82% to 99% of actively managed funds. This means just buying a total stock market index fund like VTSAX guarantees you'll be in the top performance tier. Year after year. Not bad for accepting average. I can live and prosper with that kind of average. 3. The financial media is filled with stories of individuals and professionals who have outperformed the index for a year or 2 or 3. Or in the very rare case, like Buffett, over time. I cringe at the often touted suggestion to just do what Buffett does. As if it's exciting and, after all, the companies that employ them are often advertisers. Or prospective advertisers. But investing is a long-term game. You'll have no better luck picking and switching winning managers than winning stocks over the decades. 4. People underestimate the drag of costs to investing. Paying fund and/or advisor fees of 1 to 2% seems low, especially in a good year. But make no mistake, these annual fees are a devil's ball and chain on your wealth. As a point of reference, the average mutual fund expense ratio, the fee funds charge investors, is 1.25%. The for VTSAX is 0.05%. As Bogle says, performance comes and goes but expenses are always there, year after year. After year. Compounded over time the amount lost is breathtaking. Consider this, once you begin living on the returns from your portfolio you'll be able to spend roughly 4% of your assets per year. We'll explore this 4% concept in Part 4, if 1% of your money is going to management fees, that is a full 25% of your income. 5. People want quick results, excitement and bragging rights. They want the thrill of victory and to boast about their stock that tripled or their fund that beat the S&P 500. Letting an index work its magic over the years isn't very exciting. It is only very profitable. As for me, I seek my excitement elsewhere and let indexing do the heavy lifting of my wealth building. 6. Finally, and perhaps most influential, there is a huge business dedicated to selling advice and brokering trades to people who can be persuaded to believe they can outperform. Money managers, mutual fund companies, financial advisors, stock analysts, newsletters, blogs, and brokers all want their hand in your pocket. Billions are at stake and the drumbeat marketing the idea of outperformance is relentless. In short, we are brainwashed. Indexing threatens the huge fees money managers and their lot routinely collect. They thrive on enabling your belief in the vain quest for the alluring siren of outperformance. It is no wonder they disparage indexing at every turn. Many years ago I had a martial arts instructor who was talking about effective street fighting. On the subject of high kicks he had this to say, before you decide to use kicking techniques on the street ask yourself this question, am I Bruce Lee? If the answer is no, keep your feet on the ground. Good advice when you're playing for keeps. As cool and effective as kicks look in the movies, tournaments and in the dojo, on the street they are very high risk. Unless you are both very skilled and significantly more skilled than your opponent, something unknowable in street fighting or investing, they are likely to leave you exposed and vulnerable. Even, and this is critical, if you've had success with them before. So too with investing. Before you start trying to pick individual stocks and/or fund managers, ask yourself this simple question, am I Warren Buffett? If the answer is no, keep your feet firmly on the ground with indexing. Let me take a moment to be absolutely clear. I don't favor indexing just because it is easier, although it is. Or because it is simpler, although it is that too. I favor it because it is more effective and more powerful in building wealth than the alternatives. I'd happily put in more effort for more return. More effort for less return. Not so much. Chapter 12. Bonds. So far we've spent a fair amount of time looking at the stock market, stocks and the index funds we'll use to invest in them. Makes sense. They will serve as our wealth-building tool and will most likely be the largest part of our holdings. But at various times we'll be adding bonds to the mix to smooth the ride, add a bit of income and provide a deflation hedge. Let's take a closer look. Bonds are, in a sense, the more steady and reliable cousins to stocks. Or so it seems. But as we'll see, bonds are not as risk-free as many believe. The challenge is that the subject of bonds is a big topic. The details are endless and most are unlikely to be of interest to the readers of this book. Heck, they're not all that interesting to me. Yet, unless you are comfortable just taking my word for it, you might want to know just what these things are and why they've found their way into our portfolio. But how much information is enough? Beats me. So here's what we'll do. In this chapter I'll talk about bonds in stages. Once you've read enough to be comfortable owning the things, or not, you can just stop reading. If you get to the chapter's end and you want more, entire volumes have been written on the subject that can take you further. Stage 1. Bonds are in our portfolio to provide a deflation hedge. Deflation is one of the two big macro risks to your money. Inflation is the other and we hedge against that with our stocks. You'll recall from earlier that deflation occurs when the price of goods spirals downward and inflation occurs when they soar. Yin and yang. Bonds also tend to be less volatile than stocks and they serve to make our investment road a bit smoother. Bonds pay interest, providing us with an income flow. Sometimes the interest is tax-free, for example. Municipal bond interest is exempt from federal income tax and the income tax of the state in which the bonds are issued. U.S. Treasury bonds are exempt from state and local taxes. Stage 2. So what are bonds anyway, and how do they differ from stocks? In the simplest terms, when you buy stock you are buying a part ownership in a company. When you buy bonds you are loaning money to a company or government agency. Since deflation occurs when the price of stuff falls, when the money you've lent is paid back, it has more purchasing power. Your money buys more stuff than when you lent it. This increase in value helps to offset the losses deflation will bring to your other assets. In times of inflation prices rise and so money owed to you loses value. When you get paid back your cash buys less stuff. Then it is better to own assets, like stocks, that rise in value with inflation. Stage 3. Since we own our bonds in VBTLX, Vanguard's Total Bond Index Fund, most of the risks in owning individual bonds go away. At last count, and this will vary a bit, the fund holds 7,843 bonds. All are investment grade, top quality, and none rated lower than BA, see Stage 4. This reduces default risk. The fund holds bonds of widely differing maturity dates, mitigating the interest rate risk. The fund holds bonds across a broad range of terms, reducing inflation risk. In the next stages we'll talk more about these risks, but what's important to understand at this point is this: if you are going to hold bonds, holding them in an index fund is the way to go. Very few individual investors opt to buy individual bonds, with U.S. Treasuries being the main exception, along with bank CDs which act like bonds. Stage 4. The two key elements of bonds are the interest rate and the term. The interest rate is simply what the bond issuer, the borrower, has agreed to pay the bond buyer, the lender, you, or by extension the fund you own. The term is simply the length of time the money is being lent. So, if you were to buy a $1,000 bond at a 10% interest rate 6 with a 10-year term from XYZ company, each year XYZ would pay you $100 in interest, 10% of $1,000, for a total of $1,000 over the life of the bond, $100 a year x 10 years. If you hold the bond until the end of the 10-year term, it reaches its maturity date and the bond issuer is obligated to pay back your original $1,000 investment. The only thing you have to worry about is the possibility of XYZ defaulting and not paying you back. So default is the first risk associated with bonds. To help investors evaluate the risk in any company or government bond, various rating agencies evaluate their creditworthiness. They use a scale ranging from AAA on down to D, kinda like high school. The lower the rating, the higher the risk. The higher the risk, the harder it is to find people to buy your bonds. The harder it is to find people to buy your bonds, the more interest you have to pay to attract them. Investors expect to be paid more interest when they accept more risk. So default risk is also the first factor determining how much interest your bond will pay you. As a buyer of bonds, the more risk you are willing to accept, the higher the interest you'll receive. Stage 5. Interest rate risk is the second risk factor associated with bonds, and it is tied to the term of the bond. This risk only comes into play if you decide to sell your bond before the maturity date at the end of its term. Here's why. When you decide to sell your bond, you must offer it to buyers on what is called the secondary market. Using our example above, these buyers might offer more than the $1,000 you paid, or less. It depends on how interest rates have changed since your purchase. If rates have gone up, the value of your bond will have gone down. If rates have gone down, the value of your bond will have gone up. Confusing? No. Look at it this way. You decide to sell your bond from our example above. You paid $1,000 and are earning 10% $100 per year. Now, let's say interest rates have risen to 15% and I have $1,000 to invest. Since I can buy a bond that will pay me $150 per year, clearly I'm not going to be willing to pay you $1,000 for your bond that only pays $100. Nobody would, and you'd be stuck. Fortunately, however, the secondary bond market, where bonds are traded after they have been originally issued, will calculate exactly what lower price your bond is worth based on the current 15% interest rate. You might not like the price, but at least you'll be able to sell. But if interest rates drop, the roles reverse. If instead of 10% they fall to 5%, my $1,000 will only buy me a bond paying $50 per year. Since yours pays $100, clearly it is worth more than the $1,000 you paid. Again, should you wish to sell, the bond market will calculate exactly what your higher price will be. When interest rates rise, bond prices fall. When interest rates fall, bond prices rise. In either case, if you hold a bond to the end of its term, you will, barring default, get exactly what you paid for it. Stage 6. As you've likely guessed, the length of the term of a bond is our third risk factor, and it also helps determine the interest rate paid. The longer a bond's term, the more likely interest rates will change significantly before it matures, and that means greater risk. While each bond is priced individually, there are 3 bond term groupings: short, medium and long. For example, with U.S. Treasury securities, the bonds are federal government issues. We have bills, short-term bonds of 1 to 5-year terms. Notes, mid-term bonds of 6 to 12-year terms. Bonds, long-term bonds of 12-plus-year terms. Generally speaking, short-term bonds pay less interest as they are seen as having less risk since your money is tied up for a shorter period of time. Accordingly, long-term bonds are seen as having higher risk and pay more. If you are a bond analyst, you'll graph this on a chart and create what is called a yield curve. The chart on the left is fairly typical. The greater the difference between short, mid and long-term rates, the steeper the curve. This difference varies, and sometimes things get so wacky short-term rates become higher than long-term rates. The chart for this event produces the wonderfully named inverted yield curve, and it sets the hearts of bond analysts all aflutter. You can see what that looks like in the illustration on the right. Stage 7. Inflation is the biggest risk to your bonds. As we've discussed, inflation occurs when the cost of goods is rising. When you lend your money by buying bonds, during periods of inflation, when you get it back it will buy less stuff. Your money is worth less. A big factor in determining the interest rate paid on a bond is the anticipated inflation rate. Since some inflation is almost always present in a healthy economy, long-term bonds are sure to be affected. That's a key reason they typically pay more interest. So, when we get an inverted yield curve and short-term rates are higher than long-term rates, investors are anticipating low inflation or even deflation. Stage 8. Here are a few other risks: credit downgrades. Remember those rating agencies we discussed above? Maybe you bought a bond from a company rated AAA. This is the risk that sometime after you buy the company gets in trouble and those agencies downgrade its rating. The value of your bond goes down with it. Callable bonds. Some bonds are callable, meaning that the bond issuer can pay them off before the maturity date. They give you your money back and stop paying interest. Of course, they would only do this when interest rates are falling and they can borrow money more cheaply elsewhere. As you now know, when rates fall the value of your bond goes up. But if it gets called, poof! There goes your nice gain. Liquidity risk. Some companies are just not all that popular, and that goes for their bonds as well. Liquidity risk refers to the possibility that when you want to sell, few buyers will be interested. Few buyers equals lower prices. All of these risks are nicely mitigated simply by owning a broad-based bond index fund. That's why VBTLX is our choice. Stage 9. Municipal bonds are bonds issued by governments and government agencies at the state and local levels. Typically these fund public works projects like schools, airports, sewer systems, and the like. While offering lower interest rates than corporate bonds, they have the advantage of being exempt from federal income taxes. They are also generally exempt from state income taxes for the state in which they are issued. This makes them appealing to folks in high income tax brackets, especially if they live in a high income tax state. It also makes them less expensive in interest payments for the governments that issue them. Vanguard has several funds devoted to municipal bonds, including several focused on specific states. Anyone interested can check them out on www.vanguard.com www.vanguard.com. Stage 10. There are precisely a gazillion different types of bonds. Basically they come from national governments, state and local governments, government agencies and companies. Term length, interest rates and payment terms are limited only by the imagination of the buyers, sellers and regulators. But since this is the simple path to wealth, we can comfortably end this discussion here. Chapter 13. Portfolio ideas to build and keep your wealth. We've spent these last few chapters getting to know the lay of the land, if you will. Now let's turn our attention to the fun stuff. How, exactly, can we use what we've learned so far to build and keep our wealth? I'm going to give you 2 portfolios, each using the tools, funds, we've discussed. First I'll show you exactly what I tell my 24-year-old to do. She couldn't care less about investing, and with this simple approach she doesn't have to. All she needs to do is keep adding to the pot and let it ride. Years from now she'll wake up rich. Along the way she'll outperform over 82% of the more actively engaged investors out there. We'll call this the wealth accumulation portfolio. Then I'll share with you what my wife and I do as the semi-retired couple we are. We'll call that one the wealth preservation portfolio. Your personal situation is likely different from our families. But using these 2 as parameters, and after reviewing your personal considerations. As we discussed in Chapter 5, you should be able to fashion these tools into Something that works for you. The Wealth Accumulation Portfolio. This is what I've created for my daughter and what I tell her as to why. Here's the thing, if you want to survive and prosper as an investor, you have two choices. You can follow the typical advice we examined in Chapter 1 and seek out broad diversification with extensive asset allocations. Your hope is this will smooth the ride, even as it reduces your long-term returns. Screw that. You're young, aggressive, and here to build wealth. You're out to build your pot of FU money ASAP. You're going to focus on the best performing asset class in history, stocks. You're going to get your mind right, toughen up, and learn to ride out the storms. You've heard the expression, don't keep all your eggs in one basket. You've likely also heard the variation, keep all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket very closely. Forget it. Here's what your kindly old Uncle Jim says. Put all your eggs in one basket and forget about it. The great irony of investing is that the more you watch and fiddle with your holdings, the less well you are likely to do. Fill your basket, add as much as you can along the way, and ignore it the rest of the time. You'll likely wake up rich. Here's the basket, VTSAX. No surprise here if you've been paying attention so far. This is the total stock market index fund that holds virtually every publicly traded company in the US. That means you'll be owning a part of about 3,700 businesses across the country, making it a very big and diverse basket. The fact that it is a low-cost index fund keeps more of your money working for you. Owning 100% stocks like this is considered a very aggressive investment allocation. It is aggressive, and in this wealth accumulation phase, you should be. You have decades ahead and you'll be adding new money as you go. Market ups and downs don't matter because you'll avoid panic and stay the course. If anything, you recognize drops as the stocks on sale, buying opportunities they are. Perhaps 40 years from now, or whenever you are living on your portfolio, you might want to add a bond index fund to smooth the ride. Worry about that then. At this point, I can see the financial gurus of the world gathering feathers and heating up the tar. So let me explain. Previously, we explored the idea that financial crises are just part of the landscape and the best results come from simply riding them out. You can't predict them and you can't time them. Over your investing career you'll experience many of them. But if you are mentally tough enough, you can simply ignore them. So now, if we agree that we can get our minds right, what shall we choose for riding out the storm? Clearly we want the best performing asset class we can find. Just as clearly that's stocks. If you look at all asset classes from bonds to real estate to gold to farmland to art to racehorses to whatever, stocks provide the best performance over time. Nothing else even comes close. Let's take a moment to review why this is true. Stocks are not just little slips of traded paper. When you own stock, you own a piece of a business. Many of these have extensive international operations, allowing you to participate in all the markets across the globe. These are companies filled with people working relentlessly to expand and serve their customer base. They are competing in an unforgiving environment that rewards those who can make it happen and discards those who can't. It is this intense dynamic that makes stocks and the companies they represent the most powerful and successful investment class in history. Because VTSAX is an index fund, we don't even have to worry about which companies will succeed and which will fail. As we've seen, it is self-cleansing. The failures fall away and the winners can grow endlessly. A portfolio of 100% stocks, which is what VTSAX gives you, in study after study provides the greatest return over time. However, if you are not tough enough to stay the course, or if you get scared and bail when the storms are raging, you are going to drown. But that's a psychological failure, not a downside of this asset class. As an aside, there are studies that indicate holding a 10 to 25% position in bonds with 75 to 90% stocks will actually very slightly outperform a position holding 100% stocks. It is also slightly less volatile. If you want to go that route and take on the slightly more complicated process of periodically rebalancing to maintain the allocation, you'll get no argument from me. Could it really be this easy? Yep. I started investing in 1975. At the time VTSAX had yet to be created, but over the 40 years from January 1975 until January 2015, the S&P 500 index produced an annualized growth rate of 11.9%. Just $2,400 a year, $200 per month, invested and left to ride would have grown to $1,515, $54.22 by 2015. Over that same period, a one-time lump sum investment of $10,000 would have become $897, $90.52. This despite all the panics and collapses and recessions and disasters we've endured during these last 40 years. Unfortunately, I wasn't smart enough at the time to do it. But this is the simple path to wealth I created for my then 19-year-old daughter: put all your eggs into one large and diverse basket, add more whenever you can and forget about it. The more you add, the faster you'll get there. Job done. The Wealth Preservation Portfolio. But wait, you say, I'm at or nearing retirement. I've built my wealth. Now I want to hang on to it. Or maybe I'm just not comfortable with the volatility of an all or mostly stock portfolio. I want a smoother ride. What then? Yeah, me too. A few years ago, as I was nearing my own retirement, I expanded beyond just VTSAX. Hold on now, this is going to get really complicated. You're going to have to add another index fund. Oh my! We now enter the world of asset allocation, and this will require slightly more of our time. In addition to adding the additional fund, we'll want to decide how much to allocate to each. Then once a year or so we'll want to rebalance to keep the allocations where we want them. It's going to take a couple of hours once a year. You can handle it. As we know, a portfolio comprised of 100% stocks, even in the broadly diversified VTSAX, is considered very aggressive. High short-term risk. Read, gut-wrenching volatility, rewarded with top long-term results. Perfect. For those who can handle the ride, are adding new money to their investments and who take the long view. But it's not for everybody. Maybe you don't want to deal with this level of volatility. Maybe a bit more peace of mind is required. As you get older, you might want to smooth the ride a bit, even at the cost of lower overall returns. You want to sleep at night. Now that I'm sorta retired and we are financially independent, me too. My wife and I hold some other stuff in our portfolio. But not much. Here it is. 75% stocks, VTSAX, Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund. Still our core holding for all the reasons we've discussed. 20% bonds, VBTLX, Vanguard Total Bond Market Index Fund. Bonds provide some income, tend to smooth out the rough ride of stocks, and are a deflation hedge. 5% cash, we hold ours in our local bank. You can fine-tune these allocations to your own personal considerations. Want a smoother ride? Willing to accept a potentially lower long-term return and slower wealth accumulation? Just increase the percentage in VBTLX. Comfortable with volatility? Want more growth? Add more to VTSAX. Now that we've introduced this idea of asset allocation, we'll explore it a bit more next. Chapter 14. Selecting your asset allocation. Life is balance and choice. Add more of this, lose a little of that. When it comes to investing, that balance and choice is informed by your temperament and goals. Financial geeks like me are the aberration. Sane people don't want to be bothered. My daughter helped me understand this at about the same time I was finally understanding that the most effective investing is also the simplest. Complex and expensive investments are not only unnecessary, they underperform. Fiddling with your investments almost always leads to worse results. Making a few sound choices and letting them run is the essence of success, and the soul of the simple path to wealth. Reading this book so far, you already know this. You also know that, with simplicity as our guide, we look at our investing lives in two broad stages using just two funds: the wealth accumulation stage and the wealth preservation stage. Or, perhaps, a blend of the two. VTSAX, Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, and VBTLX, Vanguard Total Bond Market Index Fund. The wealth accumulation stage is when you are working and have earned income to save and invest. For this stage, I favor 100% stocks, and VTSAX is the fund I prefer. If financial independence is your goal, your savings rate in these years should be high. As you invest that money each month, it serves to smooth out the market's wild ride. You enter the wealth preservation stage once you step away from your job and regular paychecks and begin living on income from your investments. At this point, I recommend adding bonds to the portfolio. Like the fresh cash you were investing while working, bonds help smooth the ride. Of course, in the real world the divisions might not always be so clear. You might find yourself making some money in retirement. Or over the years you might move from one stage to the other and back again more than once. You might leave a high-paying job to work for less at something you love. In my own career there were many times I chose to step away from working for months or even years at a time. Each time changed my stage. Using this framework of two stages and two funds, you have all the tools you need to find your own balance. In determining that balance, you'll also want to consider two additional factors: how much effort you are willing to apply and your risk tolerance. Effort. For the wealth accumulation stage, an allocation of 100% stocks using VTSAX is the soul of simplicity. But as we've seen, some studies suggest that adding a small percentage of bonds, say 10 to 25%, actually outperforms 100% stocks. You can see this effect by playing with the various calculators found on the internet. As you do, you'll notice that adding much beyond 25% bonds begins to hurt results. Remember that these studies are not carved in stone, and all calculators rely on making certain assumptions about the future. The difference in projected results between 100% stocks and an 80-20 mix of stocks and bonds is tiny. How those results actually unfold over the decades is likely to be equally close, and the ultimate winner is basically unpredictable. For this reason, and favoring simplicity, I recommend 100% stocks using VTSAX. That said, if you are willing to do a bit more work, you could slightly smooth out the wild ride and possibly outperform over time by adding 10-25% in bonds. If you do, about once a year you will want to rebalance your funds to maintain your chosen allocation. You might also want to rebalance any time the market makes a major move, 20% plus, up or down. This means you will sell shares in whichever asset class has performed better and buy shares in the one that has lagged. Ideally you will do this in a tax-advantaged account like an IRA or 401k, we'll be talking about those shortly, so you don't have to pay tax on any capital gains. Having to pay capital gains taxes would be a major drawback and another reason to focus on holding just VTSAX. This rebalancing is simple and can be done online with Vanguard or most other investment firms. It should only take a couple of hours a year. But like changing the oil in your car, it is critical that you actually do it. If you are unsure, you'll remember to rebalance or simply don't want to be bothered, TRFs, target retirement funds, are a fine option. These allow you to choose your allocation and then they will automatically rebalance for you. They cost a bit more than the simple index funds you'd use doing it yourself. You are paying for that extra service, but they are still low cost. We'll discuss them in more detail in Chapter 16. Risk factors. Temperament. This is your personal ability to handle risk. Only you can decide, and if ever there was a time to be brutally honest with yourself, this is it. Flexibility. How willing and able are you to adjust your spending? Can you tighten your belt if needed? Are you willing to move to a less expensive part of the country? Of the world? Are you able to return to work? Create additional sources of income? The more rigid your lifestyle requirements, the less risk you can handle. How much do you have? As we'll discuss in Part 4, the basic 4% rule is a good guideline in deciding how much income your assets can reasonably be expected to provide over time. If you need every penny of that just to make ends meet, your ability to handle risk drops. If, on the other hand, you are spending 4% but a big chunk of it goes towards optional hobbies like travel, you can handle more risk. After considering effort and risk, here are some questions you'll want to consider. When should I make the shift into bonds? This is very much a function of your tolerance for risk and your personal situation. For the smoothest transition, you might start slowly shifting into your bond allocation 5 or 10 years before you are fully retired. Especially if you have a fixed date firmly in mind. But if you are flexible as to your retirement date and more risk tolerant, you might stay fully in stocks right up until you make the change. In doing so, the stronger potential of stocks could get you there sooner. But if the market moves against you, you'll have to be willing to push your retirement date back a bit. Of course, any time you shift between the accumulation and preservation stages, you'll want to reassess and possibly adjust your allocation. Balance and choice. Yin and yang. Does age matter? Overall, I prefer to divide our investment stages by life stages rather than using the more typical tool of age. This is an acknowledgement of the fact that people are living longer and much more diverse lives these days. Especially the readers of this book. Some folks are retiring very early. Others are retiring from higher paid positions into lower paid work that more closely reflects their values and interests. Still others, like I did, are stepping in and out of work as it suits them, their stages fluidly shifting. So age seems not to matter, at least not as much as it once did. With that said, age does begin to limit your options as it advances. Age discrimination is a very real thing, especially in the corporate world. As you get older, you may not have all the same options readily available as you had in your youth. If your life journey involves stepping away from highly paid work occasionally, you'll do well to consider this. Further, as you age, you steadily have less time for the compounding growth of your investments to work and to recover from market plunges. Both these considerations will influence your risk profile, and you might want to consider adding bonds a bit earlier if that's the case. Is there an optimal time of year to rebalance? Not really. I've yet to see any credible research indicating a particular time of year works best. Even if someone were to figure it out, once known, everybody would rush to it, negating the effect. I do suggest avoiding the very end/beginning of the year. It is a popular time for rebalancing and many are engaged in tax selling and new buying. I prefer to avoid the possible short-term market distortions this might cause. Personally, we rebalance once a year on my wife's birthday. Random and easy to remember. I have some of my investments in tax advantaged accounts and some in regular accounts. How can I rebalance across those? This can be cumbersome and you'll just have to work with what you have. While it is best to hold bonds in tax-advantaged accounts, it does complicate rebalancing. First, you should be considering all your investments as a whole when figuring your allocation. Next, as a rule, it is better to buy and sell in tax-advantaged accounts to avoid creating taxable events. I recommend this unless you happen to have capital losses in a given year. Then it is best to take them in your taxable accounts when possible. For instance, you might own VTSAX in both an IRA and in a taxable account. Should you need to sell to rebalance that year, sell in the taxable account to capture the loss. You can deduct it against any other gain you happen to have, including any capital gain distributions. You can also deduct up to $3,000 against your earned income. Any loss left over you can carry forward to use in future years. But be careful not to buy more VTSAX in your IRA, or any other of your investment accounts, within 30 days of selling. If you do, the IRS will consider this a wash sale and your tax loss would be negated. Does more frequent reallocation improve performance? Investment firms that provide the service contend it can over time, but I'm not sure I buy the premise. If anything, my tilt is in the opposite direction. Which aligns me with Jack Bogle. Mr. Bogle points to research Vanguard has done comparing stock and bond portfolios that were annually rebalanced and those not rebalanced at all. The results show the rebalanced portfolios outperformed but by a margin so slight it can be attributed to noise as much as the strategy. His conclusion: rebalancing is a personal choice, not a choice that statistics can validate. There's certainly nothing the matter with doing it, although I don't do it myself, but also no reason to slavishly worry about small changes in the equity ratio. We still rebalance annually, but were I to make a change it would be to not bother with it at all. There you have it, the considerations you'll need to review and the tools you'll need to use to create the asset allocation that best fits your situation. Now why in the world haven't I included international funds in the mix like most every other writer on investing? We'll look at that next. Chapter 15. International Funds. As we've discussed earlier in the book, most advisors recommend far more funds and asset classes than the two I've suggested. Indeed, as we've seen, scared witless after the 2008-9 market implosion, many would now have us invest in everything in the hope a couple pull through. To do this properly would require a ton of work understanding the asset classes, deciding on percentages for each, choosing how to own them, rebalancing and tracking. All for what will likely be subpar performance. Still, even for some who accept the advantages of simplicity, my two-fund wealth preservation portfolio seems incomplete. The readers of www.jlcollinsnh.com are an astute bunch, and the missing asset class they ask about most frequently is international stocks. Since almost every other allocation you come across will include an international component, why doesn't our simple path? There are 3 reasons: added risk, added expense, and we've got it covered. 1. Added risk. Currency risk. When you own international companies, they trade in the currency of their home country. Since those currencies fluctuate against the US dollar, with international funds there is this additional dimension of risk. Accounting risk. Few countries, especially in emerging markets, offer the transparent accounting standards required here in the US. Even here, companies like Enron occasionally cook their books and blow up on their investors. The weaker the regulatory structure in place, the greater the risk involved. 2. Added expense. Sachs has a 0.05% expense ratio for rock-bottom costs. While cheaper than comparable funds, even low-cost Vanguard international funds have expense ratios at least twice that level. 3. We've got it covered. The key reasons cited for holding international funds are to avoid being dependent on the U.S. economy and to have exposure to the growth potential of world asset classes not correlated with the U.S. market. But we've got those covered. Looking at the first, the 500 largest stocks in the U.S. make up about 80% of VTSAX. The largest of these 500 are all international businesses, many of which generate 50% or more of their sales and profits overseas. Companies like Apple, GE, Microsoft, Exxon/Mobil, Berkshire Hathaway, Caterpillar, Coca-Cola and Ford, to name a few. Since these companies provide solid access to the growth of world markets, while filtering out most of the additional risk, I don't feel the need to invest further in international specific funds. The second frequently cited reason is the expectation that the performance of international markets will not be correlated with that of the US. That is to say, when one is up the other might be down. The idea is having them as part of your asset allocation helps smooth the ride and offers the prospect of enhanced returns through reallocations. The problem is, as world economies become ever more closely knit together, this variation in the performance of their markets fades. While there will always be exceptions due to geopolitical events, world markets are becoming increasingly more correlated. That's my take. Your worldview, however, may lead you to a different conclusion. If it does, and you feel the need for even more international exposure than that embedded in VTSAX, our friends at Vanguard have some excellent options. Here are 3 I suggest. VFWAX, FTSE All-World ex-US Index Fund, expense ratio 0.13%. VTAX, Total International Stock Index Fund, expense ratio 0.12%. Both of these invest everywhere in the world except the US, which you'll have covered with VTSAX. If you prefer to keep things as simple as possible, at a bit higher cost, you might look at VTWSX, Total World Stock Index Fund, expense ratio 0.25%. This fund invests all over the world, including a roughly 50% allocation in the US. With it, you no longer even need to hold VTSAX. While I don't feel the need for international funds, for those who do I don't strongly oppose holding them. Just be sure you understand what you already own in VTSAX and the cost and fees and additional risks these funds entail. Chapter 16. TRFs, the simplest path to wealth. Of all. Okay, you've read this far, and while the wealth accumulation portfolio requires only one fund and no effort, you need the wealth preservation portfolio, and that requires 2. So you're thinking, "Aw man. 2 funds. And I gotta rebalance them every year. That's too much to keep track of." Maybe you are even thinking, "I get what he's saying in the last chapter, but I'd still like some international exposure in my portfolio." I hear your pain. You need the simplest of all possible paths,